What if a single person's decision could change the course of civilization forever? It's a powerful thought, isn't it? The idea that one individual's ambition, one moment of courage, or one stroke of genius could send ripples across centuries, ultimately shaping the very world you and I live in today. History isn't just a collection of dates and dusty artifacts. It is a living, breathing story written by people who dared to think differently, who commanded armies and empires, who forged laws out of chaos, and whose names still echo with power and mystery thousands of years later. This is the profound legacy we are about to explore together, a journey back to the very foundations of our modern world, to a time when the fate of millions rested on the shoulders of a remarkable few. Picture the ancient world, a vast tapestry of emerging empires, of sprawling cities rising from river valleys and deserts, of ideas about government, philosophy, and power that were being invented for the very first time. In this crucible of human civilization, extraordinary individuals emerged. They were not just kings and queens or conquerors, they were visionaries. Some built monumental structures that defy explanation even now. Others crafted legal codes that became the bedrock of justice. Some led their people to unimaginable victories against overwhelming odds, while others presided over golden ages of art and science that illuminated the darkness. Their stories are a potent mix of brilliant strategy and raw ambition, of profound wisdom and shocking brutality. They are the original architects of our global landscape, and their influence is woven into the fabric of everything from our political systems to our cultural traditions. So prepare to step into their world. Over this journey, we will uncover the lives and legacies of 30 of the most formidable ancient leaders the world has ever known. We will walk the halls of power in forgotten capitals, stand on battlefields where empires were won and lost, and decipher the mysteries they left behind. This is more than a history lesson. It is an invitation to understand the forces that made us. We will meet pharaohs who believed themselves gods, philosophers who became kings, and unifiers who brought warring nations together. Each story is a piece of the puzzle, a chapter in the incredible saga of human ambition. So settle in, because we are about to embark on a voyage through time to discover how these titans of antiquity, through their actions and their wills, truly shaped the world. Our journey begins not in the familiar landscapes of Rome or Greece, but further east, in the heart of what is now Iran, with a leader whose legacy is nothing short of revolutionary, Cyrus II, known to history as Cyrus the Great. In the 6th century before the Common Era, the world was a patchwork of warring kingdoms and brutal empires where conquest typically meant annihilation, enslavement, or forced cultural assimilation for the defeated. But Cyrus shattered this mold. He emerged as the founder of the Achaemenid Empire, which would grow to become the largest empire the world had ever seen up to that point, stretching from the Indus River to the Aegean Sea. His rise to power was a masterpiece of military and political strategy, but it is his philosophy of rule that truly made him a figure for the ages, a leader whose ideas would echo for millennia. What set Cyrus apart was a concept almost unheard of in the ancient world: tolerance. After his famous conquest of Babylon in 539 B.C., instead of imposing his own gods and customs upon the captured population, he did the unthinkable. He issued a proclamation inscribed on a baked clay object known as the Cyrus cylinder. This artifact, often called the first charter of human rights, declared that all the peoples he now ruled were free to return to their homelands and, most remarkably, to worship their own gods. He famously allowed the Jewish people, who had been exiled in Babylon for decades, to return to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple. This was not merely a shrewd political move to secure a peaceful empire, it was a profound reimagining of power. Cyrus understood that an empire built on respect and cooperation would be far more stable and prosperous than one held together by fear and oppression. He established a model of governance based on the rights of nations to their own identity, a radical notion of human dignity that still resonates in our modern understanding of universal rights. This visionary approach was matched by his sheer genius for administration. To manage his vast multicultural domain, Cyrus developed a sophisticated system of satrapies, essentially provincial governments led by local governors or satraps who reported back to the central Persian authority. This structure allowed for local customs and laws to be respected while ensuring the empire remained unified and secure, connected by an impressive network of roads, including the legendary Royal Road that facilitated communication and trade across thousands of miles. He was a unifier, not just a conqueror, blending the best ideas from the many cultures under his sway, from Mesopotamian law to Lydian coinage. The empire he built became a grand exchange of ideas, technologies, and cultures, setting a precedent for every future empire from Alexander's to Rome's. Cyrus the Great demonstrated that true, lasting power comes not from crushing diversity, but from harnessing it, a lesson from the ancient world that feels strikingly relevant today. His reign established a blueprint for imperial rule that combined military might with enlightened policy, proving that the most enduring conquests are those of the mind and spirit. From the tolerant and administrative genius of Cyrus, we turn to a leader defined by an almost supernatural drive for conquest, a figure whose very name became synonymous with ambition: Alexander III of Macedon, Alexander the Great. If Cyrus built an empire on the principle of unity through diversity, Alexander forged his through the sheer, unstoppable force of his will. He was a whirlwind on the historical stage, a young king who in just over a decade, from the age of 20 until his death at 32, carved a path of conquest that stretched from the rocky shores of Greece to the lush valleys of the Indus River, creating an empire that dwarfed even that of the Persians he vanquished. His story is not just one of battles won, but of a world permanently and irrevocably transformed. Alexander's success was built upon the military foundation laid by his father, King Philip II, but he elevated warfare to an art form. His army, though often vastly outnumbered, was a perfectly tuned instrument of shock and maneuver. At its heart was the legendary Macedonian phalanx, a terrifying formation of soldiers wielding long pikes called sarissas, which presented an impenetrable forest of spear points to any enemy. Yet it was Alexander's personal leadership, his ability to inspire fanatical loyalty, and his genius for tactical improvisation on the battlefield that made the difference. He led from the front, sharing the hardships of his men, and in decisive encounters like the Battle of Gorgamla, he demonstrated an uncanny ability to identify and exploit a single weak point in the enemy line, achieving victory against seemingly impossible odds. This relentless campaign was more than a quest for territory. It was driven by a personal desire to reach the very ends of the known world, to emulate and surpass the heroes of Greek myth. But Alexander's most profound legacy was not the empire itself, which proved fleeting, but the cultural revolution he set in motion. This policy is known as Hellenism, the deliberate fusion of Greek and Persian cultures. Unlike previous conquerors who might simply impose their own ways, Alexander actively encouraged intermarriage between his Macedonian soldiers and Persian noblewomen. He adopted Persian dress and court customs, and he founded dozens of cities across his empire, most famously Alexandria in Egypt, which became thriving centers of Greek language, art, and learning. These cities were not military outposts, they were beacons of a new hybrid civilization. Greek philosophy, science, and drama met the ancient knowledge of Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Persia within their walls. The Great Library of Alexandria, a direct result of this new world, aimed to collect all human knowledge, becoming a symbol of this unprecedented exchange of ideas. The breathtaking speed of Alexander's rise is matched only by the mystery and consequence of his sudden end. In Babylon, in the year 323 before the Common Era, at the zenith of his power and still planning new conquests, he fell ill and died. The cause remains one of history's great puzzles. Debated for centuries, was it fever, poisoning, or the cumulative toll of his many wounds? With no clear adult heir, his death instantly created a power vacuum. His vast empire, held together by the force of his singular personality, had no stable administrative structure to survive him. It immediately fractured as his most powerful generals, known as the Diadochi, or successors, turned on each other in a series of devastating wars, each carving out their own kingdom from the carcass of Alexander's domain. This fragmentation, while ending the dream of a unified world empire, had an unexpected consequence. It actually accelerated the spread of Hellenistic culture. These successor kingdoms, the Ptolemies in Egypt, the Seleucids in Persia, the Antigonids in Macedon, all maintained and promoted Greek culture as a mark of their legitimacy. Consequently, the influence of Hellenism penetrated even deeper, from the Mediterranean coast deep into Asia. This created a common cultural language across a vast area, a groundwork that would later prove crucial for the spread of Roman ideas and, centuries later, even the rise of Christianity. Alexander's personal empire was ephemeral, but the cosmopolitan, interconnected world he created was his true and lasting monument, a bridge between East and West that forever changed the flow of history. Leaving behind the fragmented Hellenistic world, our exploration of ancient power takes a dramatic turn eastward, to a land of warring states and a leader whose methods were the absolute antithesis of Cyrus's tolerance. We arrive in the 3rd century before the Common Era, in what we now call China, but which was then a collection of 7 major kingdoms locked in a brutal, centuries-long struggle for supremacy. From this crucible of endless conflict emerged a figure of unparalleled ruthlessness and vision, Ying Zheng, the king of Qin, who would become Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China. His name itself is a title meaning first sovereign emperor, and he earned it by forging a single, unified Chinese state through a campaign of total war and a philosophy of governance so severe it still sends shivers down the spine. The state of Qin was already known for its strict, militaristic society, but under Ying Zheng, its power was honed to a razor's edge. His success was built upon a school of thought known as legalism. Unlike Confucianism, which emphasized virtue and moral example, or Taoism, which sought harmony with nature, legalism was brutally pragmatic. It argued that humans are inherently selfish and short-sighted, and that only a system of strict, clearly defined laws enforced through harsh, universal punishments could create an orderly and powerful state. Under the guidance of his minister, Lai Si, Qin Shi Huang applied these principles with terrifying consistency. Rewards were given for military merit and agricultural production, but the slightest infraction, even by association, could lead to mutilation, forced labor, or death. This created a society entirely geared for conquest, a machine where every individual served the state's ultimate goal, unification by any means necessary. And conquer he did, one by one. The rival kingdoms of Zhao, Han, Wei, Chu, Yan, and Kai fell to the relentless Qin armies. The unification was completed in 221 B.C., but it was merely the beginning. Qin Shi Huang understood that conquering territory was not the same as unifying a civilization. To prevent the old kingdoms from reasserting their identities, he launched the most ambitious project of standardization the ancient world had ever seen. With sweeping decrees, he mandated a single, unified system of writing characters. This was perhaps his most enduring legacy, creating a written language that could be understood by people who spoke vastly different dialects, a powerful glue that has held Chinese culture together for more than 2,000 years. He did the same for commerce and administration, standardizing the axle widths of carts so they could all travel on the same roads, creating a universal currency, and establishing consistent units of weight and measurement across the entire empire. He even connected and fortified the existing border walls of the conquered states, creating the first incarnation of what would much later become the Great Wall of China, a monumental effort to define and defend his new realm. Yet, for all his focus on building a lasting earthly empire, Qin Shi Huang was equally consumed by a desperate, all-consuming fear, his own mortality. He became obsessed with finding the elixir of life, sending expeditions to mythical islands in search of immortal beings and consuming potions that likely contained mercury, which may have contributed to his eventual decline. This obsession with cheating death found its ultimate expression in his final resting place. Historical records describe his tomb as a microcosm of his empire, complete with palaces, pavilions, and rivers of flowing mercury, all protected by booby traps designed to kill any intruder. For centuries, this was considered legend. Then, in 1974, farmers digging a well made one of the most spectacular archaeological discoveries of all time, the Terracotta Army. Just outside the tomb mound, they uncovered thousands of life-sized, meticulously detailed clay soldiers, each with a unique face, arranged in battle formation alongside chariots and horses. This silent army was meant to protect the emperor in the afterlife, a testament to his paranoia and his unwavering belief in his own power, which he expected to wield even beyond the grave. The sheer force of Qin Shi Huang's will created a centralized, bureaucratic state that became the template for all subsequent Chinese dynasties. Yet his harsh methods bred immense resentment. The very legalist policies that enabled his conquests, the heavy taxes, the corvée labor for his massive projects, the brutal punishments, made him deeply unpopular. Upon his death in 210 B.C., the Qin dynasty, for all its power, collapsed into rebellion and chaos within just 4 years, but the framework he built did not disappear. The next great dynasty, the Han, learned from his extremes. They kept the centralized administration, the standardized systems, and the unified state, but tempered legalism with the more humane principles of Confucianism. In this way, Qin Shi Huang's brutal revolution, for all its violence, ultimately created the foundational structure of China itself, proving that even the most tyrannical vision can cast a shadow that lasts for millennia. The ruthless unification of China under Qin Shi Huang stands in stark contrast to our next leader, who also presided over a monumental political transformation, but did so with a masterful and subtle touch that masked the sheer scale of his revolution. In the turbulent final decades of the Roman Republic, a young man emerged from the shadow of his murdered great-uncle, Julius Caesar, with a burning ambition to avenge his death and seize control of a fractured state. His name was Gaius Octavius, but the world would come to know him as Augustus, the revered first emperor who would cunningly dismantle the Republic while brilliantly pretending to restore it, ushering in an era of unprecedented peace and prosperity that would define the golden age of Rome. Augustus's path to power was not one of open declaration, but of calculated political maneuvering. Upon Caesar's assassination, the 18-year-old Octavian was neither a celebrated general nor a seasoned senator. Yet he possessed an uncanny understanding of power dynamics and a ruthless pragmatism that belied his youth. His first and most formidable challenge was Mark Antony, Caesar's former right-hand man, who saw the young heir as a trivial nuisance. What followed was a masterclass in realpolitik. Octavian first allied with the Senate and Cicero to legally declare Antony an enemy of the state, only to then shock the political establishment by forming the second triumvirate with Antony and Lepidus. This alliance, cemented by proscriptions that saw the deaths of hundreds of senators and wealthy Romans including Cicero, whose hands and head were displayed in the forum, eliminated their enemies and funded their war against Caesar's assassins Brutus and Cassius. After their victory at the Battle of Philippi, the triumvirate's inherent tensions bubbled to the surface. The final showdown was less a clash of ideals than a personal and political war, cleverly framed by Octavian as a patriotic crusade against Antony, who was portrayed as a traitor seduced by the Egyptian queen Cleopatra. Augustus's victory at the naval battle of Actium in 31 B.C. left him the undisputed master of the Roman world, but his true genius was only beginning to reveal itself. Having achieved absolute power through force, Augustus faced his greatest test: how to keep it without suffering his great-uncle's fate. The Roman people were exhausted by a century of civil war, but they still revered the ancient traditions of the Republic. Augustus understood that a naked dictatorship would be rejected. Instead, he orchestrated one of history's most successful acts of political theater. In 27 B.C., he appeared before the Senate and dramatically resigned all his extraordinary powers, claiming to transfer the Republic from my power to the dominion of the Senate and people of Rome. This was, of course, a brilliantly staged illusion. The Senate, filled with his supporters, promptly begged him to stay on, granting him a new, carefully crafted portfolio of powers. He refused the title of king or dictator, instead adopting the unassuming name Augustus, meaning the revered one, and the simple title princeps or first citizen. He held a collection of republican offices: consul, tribune, commander-in-chief, that, when combined, gave him ultimate control over the army, the treasury, and legislation, all while maintaining the facade of the old system. He became the permanent curator of the Roman state, a master of image-making who presented himself not as an autocrat, but as the humble restorer of traditional Roman values, piety, and peace. This peace, known as the Pax Romana, was his most tangible gift to the world. For over 2 centuries, the Roman Empire experienced a period of stability and security that allowed trade, culture, and ideas to flourish from Britain to Syria. Borders were secured, piracy was largely eliminated from the Mediterranean, and a network of magnificent roads and sea lanes connected the vast empire. This was not merely an absence of war, it was a proactive achievement of governance. Augustus established Rome's first professional standing army, with legions stationed permanently at the frontiers, and a civil service staffed by salaried officials to manage the empire's affairs efficiently. He also initiated a massive building program, famously boasting that he found Rome a city of bricks and left it a city of marble. Across the city, new temples, basilicas, aqueducts, and forums rose, each project serving a dual purpose: glorifying his reign and providing practical benefits to the populace. The Ara Pacis, or Altar of Peace, stands as a perfect symbol of his era, its intricate carvings celebrating the peace and prosperity that his rule had supposedly bestowed upon the Roman world. Augustus's legacy was this delicate, enduring balance: the creation of a stable imperial system disguised in republican clothing, a foundation of power so effective that it would guide the destiny of Rome for the next 300 years. Yet, the stability and order of Augustus's Rome came at a cost, and perhaps the most famous casualty of his rise was the captivating and complex figure who ruled the wealthiest nation in the Mediterranean. From the calculated, masculine world of Roman power politics, we journey to the dazzling, sophisticated court of Alexandria to meet a queen whose story has been shrouded in myth and propaganda for 2,000 years, Cleopatra VII. Far more than the tragic seductress of Roman legend, Cleopatra was the last active pharaoh of Egypt, a politically brilliant and fiercely determined ruler who used every tool at her disposal, including her famed charm, in a desperate and ultimately doomed bid to preserve her kingdom's independence from the encroaching Roman war machine. Born into the Ptolemaic dynasty, a Greek-speaking family of Macedonian origin that had ruled Egypt since the death of Alexander the Great, Cleopatra was raised in a palace rife with intrigue and violence. She was not Egyptian by blood, but she was the first of her line to seriously learn the Egyptian language, alongside being fluent in at least 7 others, from Greek and Latin to Ethiopian and Hebrew. This was not merely a scholarly achievement, it was a profound political strategy. By presenting herself to her people as the reincarnation of the goddess Isis and actively embracing Egyptian religion and culture, she forged a direct connection with her subjects that her isolated Hellenistic predecessors had never managed. Her path to the throne was treacherous, involving exile by her younger brother and co-ruler, Ptolemy XIII, who was backed by powerful courtiers hostile to her authority. It was this desperate situation that set the stage for her legendary encounter with the most powerful man in the Roman world, when Julius Caesar arrived in Alexandria in 48 BC. Pursuing his rival Pompey, Cleopatra saw not an invader but her only chance. The famous story of her being rolled up in a carpet or a bed sack to be smuggled past her brother's guards and into Caesar's presence is a testament to her daring and cunning. This was not the act of a passive temptress, it was the bold maneuver of a strategist. She recognized that her survival and the fate of Egypt depended on securing the support of Rome's dominant figure. The alliance that followed was a masterstroke. With Caesar's military might, she defeated her brother's forces and was restored to the throne. Their political and personal relationship, which produced a son, Caesarion, or Little Caesar, was a calculated partnership. For Caesar, Egypt's immense grain supply and wealth were vital resources. For Cleopatra, Caesar's backing was the ultimate guarantee of her power. She even visited Rome as a royal client, staying in one of Caesar's villas, a clear indication of her influential status, though her presence also stoked Roman fears and prejudices about powerful foreign women. After Caesar's assassination, the Roman world was once again thrown into chaos, and Cleopatra, with her kingdom's safety once more in jeopardy, had to choose a side. She aligned herself with the Second Triumvirate, and specifically with Mark Antony. Their meeting in Tarsus was as theatrical as her first with Caesar, a carefully staged display of wealth and divinity designed to dazzle her new potential patron. Their partnership evolved into a deep personal and political union that produced 3 children. Antony, who was given responsibility for the wealthy eastern provinces, saw in Cleopatra and Egypt a powerful base of support for his own ambitions, which increasingly seemed to rival those of Octavian. Together, they envisioned a new Hellenistic empire, a grand eastern domain that could stand alongside or even challenge the Latin West. Cleopatra was not merely Antony's lover. She was his chief ally, funding his military campaigns and advising his strategy. This fusion of Egyptian and Roman power reached its peak when Antony made the donations of Alexandria, granting vast eastern territories to Cleopatra and their children, an act that Octavian skillfully portrayed in Rome as a betrayal of the Republic, a sign that Antony had fallen under the spell of a foreign queen. The final act of this drama was the war between Octavian and the combined forces of Antony and Cleopatra, culminating in the decisive naval defeat at the Battle of Actium in 31 BC. The reasons for their flight from the battle are still debated, but the outcome was certain. Octavian's forces pursued them to Egypt, facing certain capture and the humiliation of being paraded through the streets of Rome as a trophy in Octavian's triumph. Cleopatra made her final, definitive choice. The manner of her death by the bite of an asp, a poisonous Egyptian cobra, has become the stuff of legend immortalized by Shakespeare. Whether it was an asp or another method, the symbolism was profound. The asp was associated with the royal uraeus on the pharaoh's crown, a symbol of divine kingship. In choosing this Egyptian form of death, she died not as a defeated Roman client, but as a pharaoh, robbing Octavian of his ultimate prize and controlling her own narrative for the last time. Her suicide marked the immediate end of the Ptolemaic dynasty, the annexation of Egypt as a Roman province, and the final closing of the Hellenistic age. Cleopatra's legacy has been fiercely contested ever since. Roman historians, writing under the patronage of Augustus, had every reason to paint her as a dangerous seductress who corrupted 2 of Rome's greatest men. This caricature has persisted for centuries, obscuring her true nature as a shrewd, multilingual intellectual who presided over a vibrant cultural center. a capable administrator who managed Egypt's complex economy, and a resilient leader who fought for 2 decades to navigate the lethal currents of Roman politics to keep her nation free. She was the last of the Macedonian successor monarchs, and her death symbolized the final triumph of Rome over the world Alexander had created. Her story is not one of mere romance, but a poignant chapter in the long history of how smaller, ancient kingdoms were inevitably absorbed by the rising tide of empire. From the tragic demise of Cleopatra and the final consolidation of Roman power under Augustus, we now travel across continents to another ancient empire, one that dominated the Indian subcontinent. Here, we encounter a leader whose story is one of the most profound transformations in all of history, Ashoka the Great, the 3rd emperor of the Mauryan dynasty. While Augustus mastered the art of political illusion, Ashoka's legacy is one of genuine, radical personal change, a journey from the depths of brutal conquest to the heights of compassionate governance, a shift so complete it would redefine an entire civilization's moral compass. Ashoka's early reign was characterized by the ruthless ambition typical of his era. Upon ascending the throne around 268 BC, he sought to expand the empire he inherited from his grandfather, Chandragupta Maurya. His sights were set on the powerful and independent kingdom of Kalinga, a region on the east coast of India renowned for its wealth and maritime trade. The campaign that followed was not just a war, it was a cataclysm. Historical accounts, though varying in exact numbers, describe a battle of unprecedented carnage. The Mauryan armies were victorious, but the cost was staggering. It is said that 100,000 soldiers were slain, and many times that number of civilians perished from the ensuing violence and famine. The once prosperous land of Kalinga was left utterly devastated. The pivotal moment in Ashoka's life came after this victory. As the story goes, the emperor walked among the ruins of the battlefield. Instead of the glory of conquest, he was confronted with a harrowing landscape of death and suffering, burned cities, orphaned children, and the anguished cries of the wounded. The sheer scale of the destruction he had unleashed struck him with a deep, overwhelming remorse. This was not a calculated political decision, it was a spiritual crisis. The title Ashoka means without sorrow, but the king was now consumed by it. In his own words, inscribed on one of his famous rock edicts, he confessed, "The beloved of the gods, the king Ashoka, conquered Kalinga 8 years after his coronation." 150,000 people were deported, 100,000 were killed, and many times that number perished. After that, now that Kalinga has been taken, the beloved of the gods is devoted to an intense practice of the teachings of right conduct. This personal reckoning, born from witnessing the direct consequences of his ambition, marked a complete turning point. He renounced armed conquest forever, embracing the peaceful teachings of Buddhism. But Ashoka did not simply retreat into private contemplation. He channeled his newfound conviction into one of the most ambitious public works and moral campaigns the ancient world had ever seen. He became a Dhammavijaya, a conqueror through righteousness rather than by the sword. To communicate his philosophy to every corner of his vast empire, which stretched from modern-day Afghanistan to Bangladesh, he devised a remarkable public communication system. He had his edicts, which outlined his moral and administrative policies, carved onto massive stone pillars and natural rock faces along trade routes and in population centers. Written in the local Prakrit language and using the Brahmi script, these edicts were not decrees in the legal sense, but moral exhortations accessible to common people. They promoted a revolutionary code of ethics based on Buddhist principles: non-violence or ahimsa, respect for all religious sects, obedience to parents, generosity towards priests and ascetics, and compassion for all living beings. He even established a new class of officials, the Dhamma Mahamatas, whose sole duty was to promote this ethical code and ensure the welfare of the people, including the elderly and the disadvantaged. Perhaps the most tangible symbol of Ashoka's reign is the Ashoka chakra, the wheel of Dharma. This 24-spoked wheel appears on many of his pillars, representing the Buddhist concept of the eternal cycle of truth and righteousness, and the king's duty to set this wheel in motion through just rule. This ancient symbol was revived millennia later, finding a permanent place at the center of the flag of the modern Republic of India, a powerful testament to his enduring legacy as a unifier and moral architect of the subcontinent. Yet, for such a monumental figure, a great mystery surrounds his physical remains. After his death, his relics were said to have been enshrined in tens of thousands of stupas or burial mounds across Asia. While many sites like Sanchai in India claim to hold portions of these relics, their exact distribution and final resting places remain a subject of fervent archaeological and religious search. This mystery only adds to his legend, a final echo of a ruler who sought not just to build an empire of land, but an empire of the heart and mind, proving that the most powerful conquests can sometimes be the ones we make over our own nature. From the spiritual empire of Ashoka, built on pillars of moral law, we now journey to the very origins of written law itself, to the dusty plains of Mesopotamia and the reign of a Babylonian king whose name would become forever synonymous with justice, Hammurabi. While Ashoka's edicts were carved as moral guidance, Hammurabi's contribution was far more foundational, a comprehensive, detailed legal code that sought to bring order to every aspect of daily life. Ruling Babylon in the 18th century before the Common Era, Hammurabi was a skilled military leader who united much of Mesopotamia under his control. But his most enduring legacy was not carved on a battlefield. It was inscribed on a towering black stone pillar for all his subjects to see, creating a revolutionary new concept, the idea that the law was not just the whim of a king, but permanent, public, and predictable force. The Code of Hammurabi is one of the oldest and most complete written legal codes ever discovered. It consists of 282 laws that cover a vast range of human interactions, from commerce and trade to family law, property rights, and criminal justice. What makes it so revolutionary is its sheer comprehensiveness and its underlying philosophy. The laws were not arbitrary, they were based on a clear, if severe, principle of retributive justice. This is most famously captured in laws 196 and 200, which state, "If a man destroy the eye of another man, they shall destroy his eye. If he break a man's bone, they shall break his bone." This concept, known as lex talionis or the law of retaliation, is the origin of the phrase "an eye for an eye." To our modern sensibilities, it sounds brutally harsh, but in its historical context, it was a monumental leap forward. Before written codes like this, justice was often a chaotic and disproportionate affair, settled by blood feuds where a minor insult could spiral into generations of violence. Hammurabi's code introduced a principle of proportionality. The punishment had to fit the crime, limiting vengeance and creating a standard that could be applied consistently to everyone, at least in theory. It replaced unpredictable violence with a structured system, aiming to deter crime by making the consequences clear and unavoidable. The physical object that carried this code is a masterpiece of ancient propaganda and public communication. The laws of Hammurabi were inscribed on a tall, black diorite stele, a stone pillar that stood in a public place, likely near a temple where people could gather to see it. At the top of the stele is a magnificent bas-relief carving that shows King Hammurabi standing before Shamash, the Babylonian god of justice and the sun. Shamash is seated on a throne, handing the symbols of royal authority, a rod and a ring, to the king. This image powerfully communicates the code's central claim, that these laws were not merely Hammurabi's own decrees, but were divinely inspired and sanctioned. The king was portrayed as the earthly agent of the gods, responsible for implementing their divine will for justice. By making the laws public and permanent, Hammurabi accomplished several things at once. He centralized his own authority, demonstrating that ultimate justice flowed from the throne. He provided his officials with a clear reference for settling disputes, reducing corruption and arbitrary rulings. And he gave every citizen, at least those who could read or have it read to them, a knowledge of their rights and responsibilities under the law, creating a sense of legal predictability that is essential for a complex society to function. Yet the Code of Hammurabi was far from egalitarian in a modern sense. Its application was deeply stratified by social class. The laws explicitly distinguished between three groups: free-born men, commoners, and slaves. A crime committed against a noble was punished much more severely than the same crime committed against a slave. For instance, if a doctor's negligent surgery caused the death of a nobleman, the doctor's hand would be cut off. But if the victim was a slave, the doctor merely had to replace the slave's value to the owner. This hierarchy reveals that the code's primary goal was to maintain the social order of its time, not to establish equality. It was a tool for stability, ensuring that everyone knew their place and the consequences for disrupting the established hierarchy. Despite this, its influence was profound and far-reaching. The very idea of a written, systematic legal code spread throughout the ancient Near East. Scholars see its clear echoes in the legal traditions of the Assyrians and the Hittites, and it undoubtedly influenced the later Hebrew laws found in the Old Testament. The concept that law should be written down, publicly displayed, and applied according to consistent principles is a cornerstone of nearly every modern legal system in the world. Hammurabi's stele, discovered in the ancient Elamite city of Susa in 1901, where it had been taken as plunder centuries earlier, now resides in the Louvre Museum, a silent black monument to the moment humanity began to codify its own sense of right and wrong, moving justice from the shadows of power into the light of public record. While Hammurabi's code was carved in stone for all to see, another ancient leader chose a different medium to ensure her legacy would endure for eternity: monumental architecture. From the legal landscape of Babylon, we voyage to the sun-baked banks of the Nile to meet a ruler who defied convention in every conceivable way, a woman who declared herself pharaoh and became one of Egypt's most prosperous and powerful monarchs, Hatshepsut. Her story is not just one of political success, but a fascinating tale of image-making, audacious ambition, and a later campaign to erase her from history that ultimately failed. Hatshepsut's path to power was as unconventional as her reign. She was the daughter of the great warrior pharaoh Thutmose I, and she married her half-brother Thutmose II. When he died young, his heir, Thutmose III, was just an infant born to a minor wife. In a move that was both pragmatic and unprecedented, Hatshepsut stepped in not as the boy king's regent, a temporary guardian, but as a full co-ruler. Then, in a breathtaking act of political and theological reinvention, she took the ultimate step. Around the 7th year of their joint rule, she had herself crowned as pharaoh, the king of Upper and Lower Egypt. To legitimize this radical move, she orchestrated a brilliant propaganda campaign. She began to be depicted in official art and statues not as a queen with feminine attire, but as a male king, complete with the traditional false beard, the striped Nemes headdress, and the muscular torso of a man. Inscriptions referred to her with male pronouns. This was more than a costume. It was a calculated effort to embody the very essence of kingship, which was intrinsically linked to masculinity in Egyptian belief. She even crafted a divine justification, commissioning a relief in her mortuary temple that depicted the god Amun-Ra himself visiting her mother, thus proclaiming her as the literal daughter of the king of the gods predestined to rule. This bold assertion of power was channeled into an era of unparalleled peace and prosperity. Unlike her father and stepson, who were focused on military conquest, Hatshepsut's reign was defined by ambitious trading expeditions and breathtaking architectural projects. Her most famous venture was a naval expedition to the distant, almost mythical land of Punt, likely located in modern-day Somalia or Eritrea. This was not a military invasion but a grand trade mission. Her ships returned laden with riches that Egyptians considered exotic and divine: incense trees whose resin was essential for temple rituals, ebony wood, ivory, gold, and exotic animal skins. This successful mission restored wealth to Egypt's treasury and reinforced her image as a ruler blessed by the gods, a monarch who could bring prosperity without the need for war. Her wealth and vision found their ultimate expression in stone. Hatshepsut was one of ancient Egypt's most prolific builders, commissioning projects up and down the Nile. But her masterpiece, and one of the most elegant structures of the ancient world, is her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari, nestled in the cliffs on the west bank of Thebes, directly across from the Karnak temple complex. Designed by her chief steward, Senon Mut, the temple is a stunning departure from the massive, blocky pyramids of the Old Kingdom. Instead, it is a series of 3 graceful, colonnaded terraces that rise in perfect harmony with the towering limestone cliffs behind it. It was designed not just as a tomb complex, but as a place of worship for her posthumous cult and a very public celebration of her reign. Its walls were covered in detailed reliefs depicting everything from the divine birth myth to the triumphant expedition to Punt, ensuring that her achievements would be remembered and revered forever. This temple stands as a testament to her sophisticated taste and her desire to create a legacy of beauty and stability. Yet, for all her success, a great mystery shrouds the end of her story. Decades after her death, during the sole rule of her stepson, Thutmose III, a systematic campaign was launched to destroy Hatshepsut's memory. Her magnificent statues were torn down, smashed, and buried in pits. Her cartouches, the oval rings containing her royal name, were carefully chiseled off temple walls. Her images in reliefs were defaced. For centuries, Egyptologists believed this was an act of vindictive rage by a stepson who had been kept from his full power for 20 years. However, modern scholarship offers a more complex and politically astute explanation. The destruction did not begin immediately after Thutmose III took the throne. It occurred much later, near the end of his own long and successful reign. This timing suggests it was less about personal vengeance and more about securing the royal succession for his son, Amenhotep II. By erasing the precedent of a powerful female pharaoh, Thutmose was likely trying to reassert the rigid, male-dominated line of succession and eliminate any potential claim that a future royal daughter might use to challenge his chosen heir. It was an attempt to tidy up the historical record, to remove a potentially disruptive anomaly from the accepted narrative of Egyptian kingship. This act of damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memory, is what makes Hatshepsut's story so compelling. Thutmose III's attempt to obliterate her from history was so thorough that for millennia she was almost forgotten, but it was not completely successful. The very scale of her buildings made total erasure impossible. Her majestic temple at Deir el-Bahari was too large to dismantle. The statues buried in pits were preserved from further weathering, waiting to be rediscovered by archaeologists. The chiseled-out cartouches still left a ghostly impression on the stone. In trying to destroy her legacy, Thutmose inadvertently helped preserve it, creating a puzzle that fascinated historians and ultimately led to her triumphant rediscovery in the modern era. Hatshepsut's reign demonstrates that the most enduring power is not always held by the conqueror with the largest army, but by the visionary who builds monuments to civilization and, in doing so, carves a place for themselves in history that even the most determined efforts cannot completely erase. Leaving behind the monumental ambitions of Egyptian pharaohs, we arrive in a different kind of power center, one built not on absolute monarchy but on the revolutionary idea of collective citizen rule. Our journey now takes us to the vibrant heart of classical Greece, to 5th century Athens, and to the statesman whose name is forever linked with its most brilliant era, Pericles. His leadership did not rely on a crown or a claim of divinity, but on the power of persuasion and a grand, unifying vision for his city-state. Under his guidance, Athens experienced a golden age, a breathtaking explosion of artistic, philosophical, and political achievement that would lay the foundational stones for Western civilization itself. Pericles emerged as the leading figure in Athenian politics through a combination of noble birth, formidable oratory skills, and a clear political agenda. He was a champion of the radical democracy that had been evolving in Athens for decades, a system where every free-born male citizen had a direct voice in the assembly. But Pericles' vision went far beyond simple governance. He believed that Athens' power, secured through its dominance of the Delian League, a coalition of Greek city-states initially formed to fight the Persian Empire, should be used for a higher purpose. He proposed using the League's treasury, which had been moved to Athens for safekeeping, to fund an unprecedented building project, the complete rejuvenation of the Acropolis, the sacred hill that had been ravaged by the Persians decades earlier. This was not merely a construction plan, it was a statement of Athenian identity. The new structures would be a permanent marble monument to the city's wealth, its cultural superiority, and its devotion to the gods, especially its patron goddess, Athena. The crown jewel of this project, and indeed of classical Greek architecture, was the Parthenon. This temple, dedicated to Athena Parthenos, or Athena the Virgin, was a masterpiece of precision and optical illusion. Its columns bulge slightly in the middle to appear straight from a distance, and the platform curves upward to counteract the sagging effect of the human eye. But its purpose was as much political as it was religious. Inside stood a colossal statue of Athena crafted from gold and ivory, a dazzling display of Athenian resources and artistry. The exterior was adorned with sculpted friezes depicting mythological scenes, and most significantly, the Panathenaic procession, an annual festival where Athenian citizens marched to honor their goddess. By placing his own people on the temple, Pericles was making a radical statement. The true glory of Athens was not just its gods, but its citizens. The Parthenon was a temple to Athenian democracy itself, a physical embodiment of the city's confidence and its belief in its own exceptionalism. This grand building program also served a practical economic purpose, providing paid work for thousands of artisans, laborers, and artists, further cementing popular support for Pericles' leadership. This philosophy of Athenian greatness was articulated most powerfully by Pericles himself in a speech that has echoed through the ages. As recorded by the historian Thucydides, Pericles delivered a funeral oration to honor the Athenian soldiers who died in the first year of the Peloponnesian War, a protracted conflict against the rival city-state of Sparta. This was not a somber lament. Instead, it was a defiant and idealistic celebration of the very way of life those soldiers had died defending. Pericles praised Athenian democracy as a system where power is in the hands of the many, not the few, where poverty is no barrier to public service, and where citizens obey the law out of respect, not fear. He extolled the city's open culture, its love of beauty without extravagance, and its pursuit of wisdom without losing strength. He presented Athens as the school of Hellas, an educative model for all of Greece, a place where freedom and public duty were intertwined. This speech remains one of the most eloquent defenses of democratic values ever written, a timeless ideal that continues to inspire, even as it masked the imperial realities of Athenian power over its allies. For it was this very ambition, this projection of power and cultural confidence, that inevitably led to a catastrophic confrontation. The Peloponnesian War was in many ways a clash of civilizations. On one side was the austere, militaristic, land-based society of Sparta, with its values of discipline, conformity, and tradition. On the other was the naval, commercial, and intellectually vibrant democracy of Athens, which Sparta and its allies saw as an aggressive and corrupting influence. Pericles' strategy for the war was characteristically ingenious but also tragically flawed. Knowing the Spartan army was invincible in open battle, he refused to engage them on land. Instead, he ordered the entire rural population of Attica to abandon their farms and take refuge within the safety of Athens's long walls, which connected the city to its port Piraeus. From there, the superior Athenian navy would maintain supply lines and harass Spartan coasts, aiming to bankrupt and exhaust the enemy without a major land battle. The strategy was a masterstroke of naval theory, but it demanded almost inhuman sacrifice from the Athenian people. Crowded within the city walls, a plague of horrific proportions broke out, wiping out perhaps a quarter of the population, including their families and their morale. The disease, whose exact nature is still debated by historians, caused terrible suffering and social breakdown. Through it all, Pericles remained steadfast, but the people's spirit was broken. He was briefly voted out of office and fined, a stark reminder of the fickle nature of the democracy he championed. Although he was soon reinstated, Pericles himself succumbed to the plague in 429 BC. His death robbed Athens of its most visionary leader at the very moment it needed him most. The war would drag on for another quarter century, ultimately ending in Athens's total defeat. The grand vision of an Athenian empire crumbled, but the cultural and intellectual achievements of the Periclean age proved far more durable. The philosophies debated, the plays performed, and the art created under his influence became a permanent inheritance for the world, a testament to a leader who believed that a city's greatest monument is not its walls, but the minds of its citizens. From the enlightened rule of his grandson Ashoka, we must turn back the clock to the very foundation of the Mauryan Empire itself, to the man whose sheer force of will carved a unified state from the chaotic fragments of ancient India, Chandragupta Maurya. His story reads like an epic myth, rising from obscurity to challenge the most powerful forces of his day. In the wake of Alexander the Great's invasion of the Indian subcontinent, the northwestern regions were left in a state of political turmoil, controlled by Greek satraps but ripe for rebellion. It was into this power vacuum that Chandragupta marched, not as a noble prince, but according to many traditions, as a young man of humble origin, perhaps even born to a clan of peacock tamers, a detail that makes his ascent all the more remarkable. His rise was inextricably linked to one of history's most formidable political masterminds, the philosopher and strategist Chanakya. Legend tells of a slight. Chanakya, a brilliant Brahmin, was insulted by the ruling king of the Nanda Empire, the dominant power in the Ganges plain. Burning with a desire for vengeance, Chanakya sought a figure with the potential to become a king. He found Chandragupta, recognizing in the youth the ambition and intelligence he needed. Their partnership became the engine of conquest. Chanakya is credited with authoring the Arthashastra, a breathtakingly comprehensive treatise on statecraft, economics, and military strategy that reads like a Machiavellian guidebook written 2,000 years earlier. This text advocated for realpolitik, the use of espionage, assassination, and cunning diplomacy as legitimate tools of power. With Chanakya as his guide, Chandragupta assembled a powerful army, his first major target being the vulnerable Greek settlements in the northwest. Chandragupta's timing was impeccable. He launched his campaign just as Alexander the Great's successors, known as the Diadochi, were fiercely fighting amongst themselves for control of his fragmented empire. One of these generals, Seleucus Nicator, had secured control of the eastern territories, including claims to the Indian lands Alexander had touched. In a series of confrontations, Chandragupta's forces clashed with those of Seleucus. The details are sparse, but the outcome was decisive. By around 305 before the Common Era, a treaty was signed. Chandragupta secured a vast swath of territory encompassing modern-day Afghanistan and Balochistan, and in return he gifted Seleucus 500 war elephants, a formidable asset that would help Seleucus win his own wars in the west. This treaty was not just a military agreement, it was a diplomatic coup. It established formal relations between the Mauryan and Seleucid empires, and even included a marriage alliance, perhaps sealing the deal with a Mauryan princess joining Seleucus's court. For the first time, a single Indian power had not only ejected foreign influence, but had engaged with a Hellenistic kingdom as a formidable equal. With his western flank secure, Chandragupta turned his overwhelming force eastward toward the heart of the Nanda Empire. The Nandas were notoriously wealthy but also reportedly unpopular due to their harsh taxation. Chanakya's strategic genius and Chandragupta's military leadership proved an unstoppable combination. They systematically dismantled Nanda power, culminating in the capture of their magnificent capital, Pataliputra, a city of immense wealth and sophistication. With this victory, Chandragupta became the sovereign ruler of a vast empire that stretched from the Bay of Bengal to the Arabian Sea, an empire he would then structure with breathtaking efficiency. The administrative system he established, detailed in the Arthashastra, was a masterpiece of centralized control. The empire was divided into provinces, each under a royal prince or appointed governor. A sophisticated bureaucracy managed everything from tax collection and irrigation to trade standards and public health. A network of spies reported directly to the emperor, ensuring control and rooting out dissent. The capital, Pataliputra, was described by Greek ambassadors as a magnificent fortified city, surrounded by a massive wooden wall with hundreds of towers and a complex system of moats. It was a center of power that could rival any in the contemporary world. Yet at the zenith of his power, Chandragupta's story takes a profound and mysterious turn. After ruling for approximately 24 years, he abdicated his throne in favor of his son, Bindusara. The reason was a profound spiritual transformation. He had converted to Jainism, an ancient Indian religion that emphasizes non-violence, asceticism, and the liberation of the soul from the cycle of rebirth. Embracing the strictest principles of his new faith, Chandragupta undertook a final, radical act of renunciation. Accompanied by a revered Jain monk, he traveled to Shravanabelagola, a holy site in southern India. There, it is said, he voluntarily undertook Salakana, the Jain practice of fasting unto death. This is not an act of suicide in the conventional sense, but a highly ritualized spiritual passage, a gradual renunciation of food and water undertaken with meditation and peace when a person feels their life's purpose is complete. The emperor, who had built an empire through military force and shrewd statecraft, ultimately sought enlightenment through the most extreme form of non-violence and self-denial. This extraordinary end remains shrouded in the mists of tradition, but it stands as a powerful testament to the complex spiritual currents that flowed through the lives of even the most powerful ancient rulers, a final, quiet conquest far removed from the din of the battlefield. The dramatic, spiritual exit of Chandragupta Maurya presents a powerful contrast to our next leader, whose life was defined not by peaceful renunciation but by an unquenchable thirst for political supremacy. We now return to the final, chaotic days of the Roman Republic, to a figure whose name has become a byword for power itself, Gaius Julius Caesar. His story is a whirlwind of military brilliance, audacious political gambles, and a fateful personal ambition that would shatter a 500-year-old republic and set the stage for the imperial age of his heir, Augustus. Caesar's path to greatness was paved on the distant battlefields of Gaul, a vast territory encompassing modern-day France, Belgium, and parts of Switzerland. Appointed governor of these provinces, Caesar did not see his role as merely administrative. He saw it as an opportunity for glory and wealth on an unprecedented scale. Over the course of nearly a decade, from 58 to 50 B.C., he waged a relentless and brutal campaign of conquest against the various Gallic tribes. His own written account, The Gallic Wars, is a masterpiece of propaganda, portraying himself as a brilliant commander bringing Roman civilization to barbaric lands. The reality was a series of incredibly complex military operations. Caesar's legions, though often outnumbered, were a professional force of unparalleled discipline. His genius lay in his incredible speed of movement, his ability to adapt to unfamiliar terrain and guerrilla tactics, and his mastery of siege warfare, as seen in the spectacular double wall he built around the Gallic stronghold of Alesia to trap the army of the chieftain Vercingetorix. These conquests were not just victories, they were a political engine. The immense plunder from Gaul enriched Caesar, allowing him to pay off his massive debts and fund a vast network of political supporters back in Rome. More importantly, the campaign forged his legions into an army of ultra-loyal veterans who owed their fortunes not to the distant Senate, but to their general personally. This personal army would become the key instrument of his destiny. That destiny reached its point of no return on a cold night in January of 49 BC. Following his command in Gaul, the Senate, dominated by his rivals including the staunch conservative Cotto and the brilliant General Pompey, ordered Caesar to disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen. To do so would leave him defenseless, open to prosecution and political annihilation by his enemies. Stationed with a single legion at the border of his province, the Rubicon River, Caesar faced an agonizing choice. Roman law was explicit. No general could lead a legion across this boundary into Italy proper. It was an act of treason, the declaration of a civil war. After a moment of hesitation, Caesar reportedly uttered the famous phrase, "The die is cast," and crossed the river. This was not merely a military maneuver, it was a revolutionary act. By crossing the Rubicon, Caesar was not just challenging the Senate, he was breaking the fundamental rule that had prevented military despotism for centuries. He was betting everything on the loyalty of his troops and the support of the Roman populace, who saw him as a champion against a corrupt and selfish aristocracy. The civil war that followed was swift and decisive. Pompey and the conservative optimates fled Rome, expecting to raise armies in the eastern provinces. But Caesar moved with characteristic speed, securing Italy and then pursuing his enemies to Spain and finally to Greece, at the Battle of Pharsalus in 48 BC. Despite being outnumbered, Caesar's tactical genius and the superior morale of his battle-hardened legions crushed Pompey's forces. Pompey fled to Egypt, where he was murdered by agents of the young King Ptolemy, an act meant to curry favor with the victorious Caesar. This act instead delivered Caesar directly into the orbit of Ptolemy's sister and rival, Cleopatra, beginning their own fateful alliance. Victorious in the field, Caesar returned to Rome as the undisputed master of the Roman world. His victory, however, did not lead to a restoration of the old order. Instead, he began to accumulate powers and titles that fundamentally undermined the Republic. He was appointed dictator, an ancient emergency office, but first for 10 years and then for life. He sat in a gilded chair in the Senate, wore the high red boots of the ancient kings of Alba Longa, and allowed his image to be placed on coins, a privilege previously reserved for gods and dead heroes. To his supporters, these were the honors due to a savior of the state. To his enemies in the aristocratic elite, they were the unmistakable signs of a king in all but name, a mortal threat to the liberty of the Republic. Yet, amidst this power grab, Caesar also proved to be a remarkably effective and popular reformer. He granted clemency to many of his former enemies, a policy that, while noble, would prove fatal. He overhauled the corrupt administration of the provinces, founded colonies for his veterans to reduce unemployment in Rome, and even planned extensive public works. His most enduring reform, however, was to time itself. With the help of an Alexandrian astronomer, he reformed the chaotic Roman calendar, replacing it with the Julian calendar based on the solar year of 365 days with a leap year. This calendar was so accurate that it remained the standard in Europe for over 1600 years, a lasting monument to his practical genius. It was this very combination of immense power and populist appeal that sealed his fate. A group of some 60 senators, led by Gaius Cassius Longinus and Marcus Junius Brutus, a man whom Caesar had treated almost like a son, conspired to assassinate him. They styled themselves as the Liberators, believing they were saving the Republic from a tyrant. The dramatic date was the Ides of March, the 15th of March, 44 B. C. Despite warnings, including a famous prophecy to beware the Ides of March, Caesar attended a session of the Senate held in the theater of Pompey. There, the conspirators surrounded him and in a frenzied attack stabbed him 23 times. The final, symbolic blow came when he saw Brutus among his assassins, leading him to utter, according to Shakespeare's immortal line, "Et tu, Brute." And you, Brutus." Then he fell, his body landing at the foot of a statue of his old rival, Pompey. The conspirators believed that with one act of violence they could restore the Republic. They could not have been more wrong. The mystery surrounding his assassination is not the act itself, but its profound miscalculation. The liberators had no plan for what would happen next. Instead of being hailed as heroes by the people of Rome, they were met with fear and hostility. Caesar's funeral ignited a firestorm when his will was read, revealing that he had left his gardens to the public and a cash gift to every citizen. And when Mark Antony delivered a masterful oration that displayed Caesar's blood-stained robe, the populace turned into a vengeful mob. The assassination did not save the Republic. It unleashed another 15 years of civil war that would ultimately destroy it completely, paving the way for the rise of Augustus and the permanent imperial system. Julius Caesar, in death, became a martyr, and the Republic he had broken died with him. While Julius Caesar's assassination plunged Rome into civil war, the empire that emerged was more powerful and expansive than ever, stretching its reach to the foggy northern island of Britannia. But imperial conquest inevitably breeds resistance, and from the ashes of betrayal, a legend was born. Our journey now takes us away from the marble halls of Rome to the wild, untamed lands of ancient Britain, to a queen whose name still echoes with fury and defiance, Boudica, warrior queen of the Iceni tribe. Her story is a brief, blazing fire of rebellion, a desperate and brutal uprising that nearly succeeded in driving the Romans from the island, fueled by a profound personal injustice that ignited a nation. Boudica's world was one of proud, independent Celtic tribes, each with their own kings and customs, suddenly confronted by the relentless machine of the Roman army. The initial Roman invasion under Emperor Claudius in 43 AD had established a foothold, but control was far from complete. Some tribal rulers, like King Prasutagus of the Iceni in modern-day Norfolk, chose a path of cooperation, becoming a client king who ruled his people in a loose alliance with Rome, hoping to preserve a measure of independence by acknowledging Roman supremacy. This fragile peace, however, was built on a foundation that would crumble with a single death. When Prasutagus died around 60 AD, he left a will designed to protect his kingdom, dividing his estate between his two young daughters and the Roman Emperor Nero. It was a strategic move, an attempt to appease both his family and the imperial power. But to the Romans, a client kingdom was not a truly sovereign state, and a client king's will held no legal weight. In their eyes, the entire territory reverted to direct Roman control upon the king's death. What happened next was an act of such staggering brutality and stupidity that it instantly transformed a cooperative ally into a vengeful enemy. Roman officials, led by the provincial governor Suetonius Paulinus, marched into Iceni lands to formally annex them. They treated the kingdom not as a lost ally, but as a conquered province. According to the Roman historian Tacitus, Boudica, the widow of Prasutagus, was publicly flogged, a humiliating and violent punishment for a queen. Even more horrifically, her two daughters were raped by Roman slaves. This was more than a political miscalculation. It was a profound cultural insult and a deep personal violation. In Celtic society, women could hold positions of power and influence, and the attack on Boudica and her daughters was an attack on the very honor and future of the Iceni royal line. The fuse of rebellion was lit not by a desire for abstract freedom, but by raw personal vengeance and a mother's fury. Boudica did not merely grieve, she organized. She became the charismatic leader of a coalition of tribes who had also suffered under Roman rule, particularly the Trinovantes to the south, who chafed under heavy taxes and the confiscation of their lands for Roman veterans. Uniting these often fractious tribes was no small feat, but Boudica's cause was a powerful rallying cry. She was described as a striking figure, tall with a fierce gaze, a mass of fiery red hair falling to her hips, and a commanding voice that could stir the hearts of thousands. She harnessed a deep-seated resentment against the foreign occupiers, whose towns, taxes, and temples were eroding the traditional Celtic way of life. To her followers, she was not just a queen seeking revenge, she was a figure of destiny. It was said that while mobilizing her army, she released a hair from the folds of her dress and interpreted its direction of flight as a sign of victory from the goddess Andrast, the Celtic deity of war. This blend of royal authority, personal tragedy, and divine sanction made her an unstoppable force. The rebellion erupted with volcanic fury. While the Roman governor Suetonius Paulinus was away on a campaign to crush the Druidic stronghold on the island of Anglesey in Wales, Boudica's forces saw their chance. Their first target was Camulogenum, modern-day Colchester, which was a colonia, a settlement for retired Roman legionaries. It was a symbol of everything the tribes hated, a town for foreign soldiers built on land taken from the locals, dominated by a massive temple dedicated to the deified Emperor Claudius. The Iceni and Trinovantes descended upon the city, which was poorly defended. They burned it to the ground, massacring its inhabitants without mercy. The Temple of Claudius, the ultimate symbol of Roman oppression, became a final refuge for the townspeople, holding out for 2 days before it, too, was overrun and destroyed. The news sent a shockwave of terror through the Roman administration. Boudica's army, now swollen with recruits from other tribes, swept southward like a wildfire. Their next target was Londinium, then a bustling commercial trading port, but not yet a fortified city. Suetonius Paulinus, rushing back from Wales, assessed the situation and made a cold, strategic decision. He did not have enough troops to defend Londinium. He chose to sacrifice the town to save his army, ordering a retreat and abandoning its citizens to their fate. The rebels poured into Londinium, and the story of Camulogenum repeated itself on an even larger scale. The town was systematically looted and burned, its Roman and pro-Roman inhabitants slaughtered. Archaeological layers in London still show a distinct band of red, burnt debris, a silent, physical testament to Boudica's rage. The same fate befell Verulamium, modern-day St. Albans, another prosperous Roman-influenced town. The revolt had claimed 3 of the most significant Roman settlements in Britain, and tens of thousands were dead. For a fleeting moment, it must have seemed that the Roman occupation was over. But Suetonius Paulinus was a seasoned and ruthless commander. He regrouped his forces, combining his own legions with auxiliary units, and chose his battlefield with care. He selected a narrow, defile-like location with a dense wood behind him and open ground in front, preventing the possibility of encirclement by the massive but undisciplined British horde. The exact location of this final battle remains one of history's enduring mysteries, with sites across the English Midlands proposed but never definitively proven. Boudica's army, confident and vast, faced the compact, disciplined Roman lines. The Romans, with their heavy shields, short swords, and coordinated javelin volleys, were a professional killing machine. The Britons, for all their courage, were a tribal force reliant on individual bravery and chariot charges. They lacked the armor, training, and cohesion of the legions. Tacitus describes the battle as a slaughter. The Romans advanced in a wedge formation, cutting through the British ranks. The rebellion's momentum broke against the unyielding wall of Roman steel. The Britons were routed, and their retreat was hampered by their own baggage train, a circle of wagons containing their families who had come to watch the expected victory. The resulting carnage was horrific. The fate of Queen Boudica after this crushing defeat is as shrouded in mystery as the location of the battlefield. The Roman accounts, our primary sources, tell us she survived the fight but did not submit. Tacitus writes simply that she poisoned herself to avoid capture. Cassius Dio offers a more dramatic version, stating she fell sick and died, and was given a lavish burial by her people. What is almost certain is that her body was never found by the Romans. This absence allowed a powerful legend to grow. The mystery of her final resting place has fascinated people for centuries. Numerous locations across eastern England, from ancient barrows to secret groves, have been proposed as the tomb of the warrior queen, but no archaeological evidence has ever confirmed any of them. It is as if the land itself swallowed her up, denying the Romans their ultimate trophy and preserving her spirit. In the immediate aftermath, Roman vengeance was swift and terrible. The rebellion was crushed, and Suetonius Paulinus began a campaign of punitive raids that was so harsh he was eventually recalled to Rome for fear he would provoke another uprising. But Boudica's legacy was far from finished. She was largely forgotten for centuries, a footnote in Roman histories. It was during the Renaissance and particularly the Victorian era that she was rediscovered and reinvented as a national icon. For a Britain building its own empire, Boudica became a powerful symbol of native resistance against foreign domination. Queen Victoria was even seen as a namesake and a spiritual successor. Poems, paintings, and eventually a monumental bronze statue of Boudica in her chariot, erected near the Houses of Parliament in London, cemented her place in the national psyche. She is a complex symbol, both a tragic figure of defeat and an everlasting emblem of the fight for freedom, a reminder that even against the mightiest empire, the will to resist can create a legend that outlasts conquest itself. From the desperate, furious rebellion of Boudica on the wild fringes of the Roman Empire, we now turn back to its very heart, to a period of crisis and transformation that would fundamentally redirect the course of Western civilization. The 3rd century after the Common Era was a time of near collapse for Rome, a chaotic era of civil war, economic disaster, and foreign invasion known as the crisis of the 3rd century. From this turmoil emerged a leader whose decisions would not only stabilize the empire but permanently alter its spiritual and geographical center of gravity, Constantine I, known to history as Constantine the Great. His reign represents a pivotal crossroads where the ancient pagan world began its definitive turn toward a Christian future, a shift cemented by a combination of military victory, political genius, and profound personal conviction. The defining moment of Constantine's early career, and indeed one of the most consequential events in religious history, occurred on the eve of a decisive battle for control of the Western Roman Empire. In the year 312, Constantine was marching towards Rome to confront his rival Maxentius. As the story, later recounted by the Christian historian Eusebius, goes, Constantine and his army witnessed a miraculous sign in the sky around noon. They saw a cross of light above the sun, accompanied by the Greek words epsilon, nu tau omicron upsilon tau letter 1, ff3 nu y ota kappa alpha. In this sign, conquer. That night, Christ himself appeared to Constantine in a dream, instructing him to place the heavenly symbol on the shields of his soldiers. The exact nature of the vision has been debated for centuries. Some scholars suggest it may have been a solar halo, a known atmospheric phenomenon, while others see it as a powerful piece of political or spiritual propaganda. Regardless of its origin, Constantine acted. He ordered his troops to adorn their shields with a symbol known as the Chi Rho, the first 2 letters of Christ's name in Greek. The next day, at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, Constantine's forces, though outnumbered, achieved a stunning victory. Maxentius drowned in the Tiber River, and Constantine entered Rome as the undisputed ruler of the West. This victory was more than a military triumph, it was a turning point. Constantine, who had previously worshipped the traditional Roman sun god, Sol Invictus, now began to openly favor the Christian god whom he credited for his success. This favoritism soon evolved into official policy. In 313, Constantine met with his co-emperor in the east, Licinius, in the city of Milan. The result of their agreement was the Edict of Milan, a proclamation that fundamentally changed the status of Christianity within the empire. It did not, as is sometimes thought, make Christianity the official state religion. That would happen decades later under Emperor Theodosius. Instead, the Edict of Milan established a policy of universal religious toleration. It declared that Christians and all people should be allowed to follow the religion of their choice without fear of persecution. For Christians, this was a momentous reversal. For nearly 3 centuries, they had been a persecuted minority, subject to sporadic but often brutal state-sanctioned violence. Now they were not merely tolerated, they were actively supported by the emperor himself. Constantine returned property that had been confiscated from Christian communities. He granted special privileges to the Christian clergy, and he began to pour imperial funds into the construction of grand churches, most famously Old St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, built over the supposed burial site of the apostle. This shift was pragmatic as much as it was pious. Constantine recognized that the Christian Church was a well-organized, empire-wide institution that could serve as a powerful unifying force, helping to bind together a fractured realm. His vision for a renewed empire extended far beyond religious policy. Constantine understood that the old capital of Rome, with its entrenched pagan aristocracy and its distant location from the empire's most threatened frontiers, was no longer an ideal administrative center. He envisioned a new capital, a new Rome, that would be a Christian city from its foundation, free from the weight of pagan tradition and strategically positioned to oversee the volatile Danube and Euphrates frontiers. His gaze fell upon the ancient Greek city of Byzantium, a port city on the Bosporus Strait, perfectly situated at the crossroads of Europe and Asia. In 330, he officially dedicated the city, naming it Constantinople, the city of Constantine. This was not a simple renaming, it was one of the largest building projects in ancient history. Magnificent new walls were constructed, palaces and governmental buildings rose, and treasures from across the empire were brought to adorn the new capital. Most significantly, it was filled with Christian churches, not pagan temples. The city was designed as a deliberate statement. The future of the empire was Christian, and its heart was now in the east. Constantinople would endure as the capital of the Roman Empire, later called the Byzantine Empire, for over 1,000 years, a bastion of Christianity and classical learning long after the fall of the West. Despite his lifelong patronage of Christianity and his profound influence on its development, even presiding over the Council of Nicaea in 325 to help settle theological disputes, a deep mystery surrounds Constantine's own personal faith. He was not baptized as a Christian until he was on his deathbed in the year 337. To modern eyes, this seems like a strange contradiction, but in the context of the time, it was a common, though not universal, practice. Many Christians of the era believed that baptism washed away all prior sins. By postponing the sacrament until the very end of his life, Constantine could participate fully in the often ruthless demands of imperial politics, including ordering the executions of his wife Fausta and his eldest son Crispus, without the spiritual burden of sinning after baptism. His choice, however, has led to centuries of debate. Was he a genuinely devout believer who wanted to ensure his soul was pure for the afterlife? Or was he a master politician who saw the Christian Church primarily as a tool for consolidating his power, only making a final commitment when it no longer had any political cost. His deathbed baptism, administered by the Arian bishop Eusebius of Nicomedia, remains an enigmatic finale to a reign that so forcefully directed the faith's future. Constantine's legacy is therefore one of profound duality. He used the power of the state to elevate a once persecuted sect into a dominant world religion, ensuring its survival and growth. But in doing so, he also bound the church to the interests of the empire, creating a model of church-state relations that would define European history for the next millennium, shaping everything from medieval kingship to the Renaissance and beyond. The transformation of the Roman Empire under Constantine from a pagan to a Christian state stands in stark contrast to the origins of another faith that would also shape world history, one rooted not in imperial decree but in the story of a single, divinely chosen kingdom. Our focus now shifts from the grand basilicas of Constantinople to the rocky highlands of ancient Canaan, to a figure who is as much a symbol of faith as he is a subject of historical debate, King David of Israel. More than just a biblical character, David represents the idealized union of military might, spiritual depth, and political unification, a king whose legacy would define a nation's identity for 3,000 years. His story, as preserved in the Hebrew scriptures, is a rich tapestry of triumph and tragedy, depicting a shepherd boy who rose to become the ruler of a united monarchy and the founder of a royal dynasty promised to endure forever. David's ascent to power reads like an epic crafted for the ages. He first appears as the youngest son of Jesse, a simple shepherd from Bethlehem, yet he is secretly anointed by the prophet Samuel to eventually replace Israel's first king, Saul. His legendary entrance onto the national stage comes with the confrontation against the Philistine giant, Goliath. While Saul's army is paralyzed with fear, the young David, armed with only a sling and his unwavering faith, steps forward. His victory is not just a tactical feat but a powerful theological statement. The true strength of Israel lies not in its armor but in its covenant with God. This act of valor won him a place in Saul's court and the deep friendship of the king's son, Jonathan, but it also ignited Saul's murderous jealousy, forcing David into a long period as a fugitive, hiding in the wilderness and even feigning madness among Israel's enemies. These years of hardship honed his skills as a guerrilla leader and built a loyal following of outcasts and warriors, the very men who would later become the core of his army. When Saul and Jonathan were eventually killed in battle against the Philistines, the path to the throne was open but not straightforward. David was anointed king of his own tribe, Judah, while Saul's surviving son, Ishbosheth, ruled the northern tribes of Israel. A bitter civil war ensued, ending with David's eventual recognition as king over all 12 tribes of Israel, a fragile union he would work tirelessly to strengthen. His most masterful political and spiritual decision was the capture of the Jebusite city of Jerusalem. Situated on the border between the northern and southern tribes, this stronghold was neutral ground belonging to neither. By conquering it and making it his new capital, David created a unifying center for his kingdom, a city that was solely his own achievement, free from the tribal loyalties that could have fractured his realm. He then elevated Jerusalem's status from a political capital to the spiritual heart of the nation by bringing the Ark of the Covenant, the most sacred object representing God's presence, into the city with great celebration. He dreamed of building a permanent temple to house the Ark, a plan that, according to the biblical narrative, was deferred to his son Solomon because David, as a man of war, had shed too much blood. This profound connection between dynasty, capital, and divinity cemented Jerusalem's eternal significance for Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. David's reign was marked by relentless military campaigns that expanded the borders of Israel further than they would ever reach again, from the Red Sea in the south to the Euphrates River in the north, subduing old enemies like the Philistines, Ammonites, and Moabites. He established a centralized administration complete with record keepers and officials, transforming a loose confederation of tribes into a recognized regional power. Yet the biblical narrative is unflinching in its portrayal of David's profound flaws, making him one of literature's most complex and human characters. At the zenith of his power, he committed his most grievous sin. From his palace roof, he saw Bathsheba, the wife of one of his most loyal soldiers, Uriah the Hittite, and desired her. After she became pregnant, David attempted to cover his transgression by recalling Uriah from the battlefield, hoping he would sleep with his wife and believe the child was his. When Uriah's sense of duty prevented this, David orchestrated his death by ordering his generals to abandon him in the heat of battle. The prophet Nathan then confronted the king with a parable that forced David to condemn his own actions, leading to a moment of raw penitential grief. This story of abuse of power, adultery, and murder is immediately followed by a cascade of divine punishment and personal tragedy, including the death of the child born from the union and the violent rebellion of his own son, Absalom. The king who could unite a nation could not control his own family, and his final years were marred by palace intrigue and struggles over succession. This duality is central to his legacy. He is both the pious composer of the beautiful Psalms, expressing the deepest longings of the human soul for God, and the fallible man whose personal failures brought immense suffering upon his house. This compelling biblical portrait, however, stands in sharp contrast to the silence of the archaeological record, creating one of the most heated debates in modern archaeology. For a king described as ruling a vast and powerful empire, the physical evidence from 10th century B.C. Jerusalem is surprisingly scant. The city was a relatively small, fortified town, not the magnificent capital one might expect. No monumental inscription bearing David's name has ever been found within Jerusalem itself. For decades, many scholars argued that the biblical account was a later, idealized creation from the 7th century B.C. or later, a piece of political propaganda designed to legitimize the later kingdom of Judah by giving it a glorious founder. The tide began to turn in 1993 with a discovery not in Jerusalem, but at the ancient site of Tel Dan in northern Israel. Archaeologists uncovered a victory stele written in Aramaic by an enemy king, likely Hazael of Aram Damascus, which boasted of defeating the king of the House of David. This was a seismic discovery, here from the 9th century B.C., just a century after David would have lived, was a clear reference to a Davidic dynasty. This external evidence strongly suggests that David was a genuine historical figure, the founder of a royal house known to his enemies. Yet, the debate continues over the scale and nature of his kingdom. Was he a local chieftain who ruled a small hill country chiefdom, or did he truly command a sprawling empire as the Bible claims? The archaeological evidence currently leans toward a more modest interpretation, a realm that was significant for its time but whose legendary golden age was likely amplified by later writers looking back on a foundational hero. This historical ambiguity extends to the very end of his story, the mystery of his final resting place. The Bible states simply that David slept with his ancestors and was buried in the city of David, the original Jebusite stronghold he conquered. For centuries, tradition has pointed to a site on Mount Zion in Jerusalem, just outside the walls of the Old City, as the tomb of King David. It is a place of deep reverence for Jews, Christians, and Muslims alike. However, most archaeologists are deeply skeptical. The structure housing the tomb dates from the Crusader era, more than 2,000 years after David's time, and there is no archaeological evidence to confirm that the burial site is authentic. The actual location of the city of David is now known to be a ridge to the south of the Temple Mount, an area that has been extensively excavated. While tombs from the Canaanite and Israelite periods have been found there, none can be definitively linked to the legendary king. This leaves us with a powerful paradox. The physical proof of David's existence remains elusive. His empire's grandeur is debated, and his tomb is likely a pious tradition rather than a historical fact. Yet his impact is undeniable. Through the Psalms attributed to him, he shaped the language of prayer for billions. Through the messianic hope rooted in his dynasty, he influenced the core beliefs of Christianity. And through his symbolic unification of a people around Jerusalem, he provided a foundational narrative that continues to resonate with profound force in the modern world, proving that a leader's legacy is often measured not by the stones they leave behind, but by the faith and identity they inspire. While the kingdoms of Egypt and Mesopotamia were forging their own paths, a development of truly world-altering proportions was taking shape further north, in the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. For centuries, this region, known as Mesopotamia, was a collection of independent and often rival Sumerian city-states like Uruk, and Lagash. They shared a culture and a language, but they were fiercely competitive, their city walls marking the boundaries of their loyalty. Then, around 2,300 years before the Common Era, a figure emerged who would shatter this model forever, creating a new form of political organization that would dominate human history for millennia: the empire. His name was Sargon, and he became known as Sargon of Akkad, the founder of the world's first true empire. The story of Sargon's origins is so dramatic it blurs the line between history and legend, echoing tales of mythical heroes abandoned at birth. According to a later Akkadian poem, his mother was a high priestess who secretly gave birth to him. Fearing discovery, she placed the infant in a basket sealed with bitumen and set him adrift on the Euphrates River. This motif of the river-born child saved by fate would be repeated in the stories of Moses and countless other cultural heroes. In Sargon's case, the basket was found by a water drawer named Aki, who raised the boy as his own son, giving him the humble work of a gardener. Yet the legend claims the goddess Ishtar favored the young Sargon, setting him on a path that would lead him to the court of the king of the Sumerian city-state of Kish. There he rose through the ranks to become the king's cupbearer, a position of great trust that gave him intimate knowledge of the workings of power. The tale, whether factual or symbolic, serves a powerful purpose. It portrays Sargon as a self-made man, chosen by the gods, whose destiny was not inherited but forged by his own merit and divine favor, a radical idea for the ancient world. His rise to supremacy began with a bold act of usurpation. Sargon overthrew his master, the king of Kish, and assumed the throne for himself, but his ambition stretched far beyond a single city. He assembled a professional standing army, a revolutionary concept in an era when armies were typically raised from farmers for specific campaigns. This was his first great innovation. With a dedicated, well-trained force loyal directly to him, Sargon could campaign for longer periods and over greater distances than any ruler before him. He then turned his attention to the dominant power in southern Mesopotamia, Lugal-Tsaigsi, the king of Umma, who had himself conquered and united the other major Sumerian cities. In a series of battles, Sargon's army defeated Lugal-Tsaigsi's forces. The Akkadian account boasts that Sargon brought Lugal-Tsaigsi to the city of Nippur, a great religious center, and paraded him in a neckstock before the temple of the god Enlil, a profound act of humiliation that demonstrated a complete transfer of power. Conquest, however, is one thing, holding territory is another. Sargon's true genius lay not just in his military victories, but in the administrative system he created to govern his vast new domain, which stretched from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea. He faced a fundamental challenge: how to rule over diverse peoples, most notably the Sumerians in the south and his own Semitic-speaking Akkadians in the north. His solution was to create a centralized imperial administration that bypassed the old, entrenched local aristocracies. He installed Akkadian-speaking governors, often chosen from his own loyal followers, to rule the conquered city-states. To ensure their loyalty and maintain communication across the empire, he stationed garrisons of Akkadian troops in key cities and developed a network of roads and messenger services that allowed instructions and intelligence to flow quickly from the capital to the provinces. This system of central control, backed by military force, became the essential blueprint for every empire that followed, from the Babylonians to the Romans. Perhaps his most enduring innovation was the way he leveraged culture as a tool of unification. Instead of suppressing the advanced Sumerian culture, Sargon and his successors actively appropriated and assimilated it. The Akkadians adopted the Sumerian cuneiform writing system, but began using it to write their own Akkadian language. They elevated the Sumerian gods into their own pantheon, with Sargon appointing his daughter Enheduanna as the high priestess of the moon god Nanna in the Sumerian city of Ur. Enheduanna is history's first author known by name, and her hymns skillfully blended Sumerian and Akkadian religious traditions, a clear political effort to create a shared cultural and religious identity that would bind the empire together. This policy of cultural synthesis, combined with military might and administrative control, allowed the Akkadian Empire to thrive for over a century, creating a legacy far greater than the sum of its conquered parts. Sargon of Akkad demonstrated that true power is not merely about winning battles, but about building a structure of governance that can withstand the centrifugal forces of geography and identity, a lesson that every aspiring empire builder would have to learn, whether they knew his name or not. Leaving behind the foundational but shadowy empire of Sargon, we now travel forward more than 1,000 years to the zenith of another, even more iconic ancient power, the New Kingdom of Egypt. Here, we encounter a pharaoh whose very name became synonymous with colossal ambition and eternal self-promotion, a ruler who sought to stamp his image so indelibly across the land that time itself could not erase him. This is Ramesses II, a king who reigned for an astonishing 66 years and whose legacy is a masterclass in the art of ensuring one's own greatness is remembered for millennia. Ramesses II ascended the throne as the third pharaoh of the 19th dynasty, inheriting an empire already restored to glory by his predecessors after the turbulent Amarna period. He was a master of what we might today call branding, but on a scale almost unimaginable. From the delta in the north to the cataracts of Nubia in the south, he embarked on the most prolific building program in Egyptian history, arguably surpassing even the pyramid builders of the Old Kingdom. He did not just add to existing temples, he built them from the ground up and with a specific purpose. At sites like the Ramesseum, his magnificent mortuary temple on the west bank of Thebes, and the temple complexes at Luxor and Karnak, he engaged in a practice known as usurpation. He would methodically chisel out the names of previous pharaohs from obelisks and statues and recarve them with his own. It was a systematic campaign to dominate the physical and historical landscape, ensuring that pilgrims and priests for generations would see his name and offer prayers for his ka or soul, thereby granting him immortality. His message was simple and relentless: Ramesses is everywhere and Ramesses is eternal. This obsession with his own image reached its ultimate expression in one of the most dramatic military encounters of the ancient world, the Battle of Kadesh. In the 5th year of his reign, around 1274 B.C., Ramesses led his army north into modern-day Syria to challenge the Hittite Empire, Egypt's primary rival for control of the Levant. The strategic prize was the city of Kadesh. What transpired was a near-catastrophic military blunder that Ramesses, through sheer force of propaganda, transformed into his greatest personal triumph. Lured by false information from captured Hittite spies, Ramesses rushed ahead of the main body of his army with a single division, believing the Hittites were still far away. In reality, the entire Hittite army was concealed behind the city. They launched a devastating surprise attack, smashing through the 2nd Egyptian division and nearly overrunning Ramesses' own camp. The pharaoh himself was encircled and in mortal danger, According to the official Egyptian account, which Ramesses had carved in magnificent reliefs on the walls of temples at Abu Simbel, the Ramesseum, Karnak, and elsewhere, what happened next was nothing short of a miracle. Abandoned by his panicking troops, the young pharaoh single-handedly turned the tide. The inscriptions depict him as a superhuman figure, charging into the fray alone. His Majesty slew the entire force of the Hittite enemy, all its great chiefs and all its brothers. His Majesty was alone, none other with him. This audacious claim of solo heroism is, of course, a profound exaggeration. Historical reality, pieced together from both Egyptian and Hittite records, suggests that the battle was ultimately saved by the timely arrival of an elite Egyptian corps from the coast and Ramesses' own strategic regroupment. The outcome was far from the decisive victory he claimed. It was a bloody, costly stalemate that left Kadesh firmly in Hittite hands. Yet, through the power of narrative carved in stone, Ramesses the Great successfully rebranded a tactical failure into a legendary personal victory, a testament to his understanding that controlling the story could be as important as winning the battle. The sheer scale of his ambition is perhaps best embodied by the twin temples of Abu Simbel. Carved directly into a sandstone cliff face in Nubia, far to the south of the Egyptian heartland, this was more than a temple. It was a statement of power aimed at Egypt's southern neighbors and a breathtaking declaration of divine kinship. The larger temple is fronted by 4 colossal seated statues of Ramesses himself, each towering over 65 feet high. Their impassive faces gaze eternally across the Nile, a terrifying and awe-inspiring sight for any approaching traveler. More than just a monument to his own ego, the temple's interior was an architectural marvel of precise solar alignment. Twice a year, on February 21st and October 21st, dates believed to correspond with his birthday and coronation day, the rising sun would penetrate the deep, dark hall, illuminating the statues of 3 gods and the deified Ramesses seated in the innermost sanctum. The 4th statue of the god of the underworld, Ptah, remained forever in shadow. This celestial event demonstrated a profound connection between the pharaoh and the cosmos, a piece of architectural propaganda that linked his rule to the fundamental order of the universe. For all his efforts to achieve immortality through stone, the most intimate and perhaps most powerful connection to Ramesses comes from his own physical body. Unlike many royal mummies that were lost to tomb robbers, the mummy of Ramesses the Great was discovered in 1881 in a secret cache at Deir el-Bahari, where the priests of the 21st dynasty had hidden the bodies of numerous New Kingdom pharaohs to protect them from desecration. When the linen wrappings were carefully unwound, archaeologists and scientists were granted an unprecedented glimpse of the man behind the legend. His mummy is that of a tall man, over 5 feet 10 inches, with a strong, prominent nose and a square jaw. His hair was originally red, a color sometimes associated with the god Seth, which may have held religious significance. Scientific analysis revealed he suffered from severe dental problems, arthritis, and hardened arteries in his later years, the common ailments of an aging man, not an invincible god-king. This physical evidence creates a poignant contrast with the idealized colossi he left behind. The discovery of his well-preserved mummy did more than just confirm historical accounts. It humanized a figure who had spent his life building a myth of superhuman proportions. His body was even flown to Paris in 1976 for a conservation treatment, where it was received with full military honors befitting a visiting head of state. A final, strange chapter in the 3,000-year journey of a pharaoh who truly succeeded in making his name live forever. In the end, Ramesses the Great teaches us that while empires rise and fall, and battles are won, lost, or rewritten, the most enduring power often lies in the ability to command the attention of posterity itself. From the sun-baked monuments of Egypt, we cross the Mediterranean to the rising power that would challenge Rome for dominance, Carthage. In the 3rd century before the Common Era, This North African maritime empire controlled trade routes across the sea, but its ambitions collided with the expanding Roman Republic. From this clash emerged one of the most formidable tactical minds the world has ever known, a man whose very name struck terror into the heart of Rome for over a decade, Hannibal Barca. His story is not merely one of battles, but of an almost superhuman commitment to a singular goal, a campaign of such audacity that it remains the standard for strategic daring even today. Hannibal's destiny was forged in the aftermath of the First Punic War, a conflict that saw Carthage defeated and stripped of its prized possessions, Sicily and Sardinia. According to the historian Polybius, Hannibal's father, Hamilcar Barca, made the young boy swear a sacred oath on an altar to never be a friend to Rome. This personal vendetta against the rising Italian power became the driving force of Hannibal's life. When he took command of Carthaginian forces in Spain, he quickly demonstrated his military prowess, but his true ambition was far grander than consolidating power in Iberia. He deliberately provoked a conflict with Rome's ally, the city of Saguntum, knowing it would draw him into a second decisive war. Instead of waiting for the Romans to bring the fight to him, Hannibal conceived a plan of breathtaking risk. He would not meet them at sea, where Roman power was growing, nor would he wait for them in Spain. He would take the war directly to Italy, marching an army, and its most fearsome weapon, war elephants overland through hostile territories and across one of the most formidable natural barriers in Europe, the Alps. The journey itself was a feat of legendary endurance. Hannibal departed from his base in Spain with an army of around 50,000 infantry, 9,000 cavalry, and 37 elephants. The march through Gaul was challenging enough, requiring diplomacy and force to navigate tribal lands, but the ascent into the Alps in the late autumn of 218 B.C. was a nightmare of a different order. His army, which included soldiers from diverse cultures across the Carthaginian sphere, was not equipped for mountain warfare. They faced not only the sheer, icy paths and perilous cliffs, but also the constant harassment from local tribes who raided from the heights above. The most famous element of this journey, the elephants, presented a colossal logistical problem. How do you coax a multi-ton animal along narrow, crumbling mountain trails? Historical accounts describe soldiers cutting new paths through rock, building temporary bridges over chasms, and using clever tactics to guide the terrified animals. The crossing took a horrific toll. By the time Hannibal's exhausted, frostbitten army descended into the fertile plains of northern Italy after just over 2 weeks in the mountains, his force had been halved. Yet the psychological impact of his achievement was immeasurable. He had done the impossible. The Romans, who believed the Alps were their impenetrable northern shield, were utterly stunned. Hannibal was no longer a distant threat. He was in their homeland. Once in Italy, Hannibal's tactical genius went on full display. He understood that Rome's greatest strength was its citizen legions, but also their potential weakness, their aggressive, head-on fighting style. He exploited this with masterful cunning. In his first major encounters at the Trebia River and Lake Trasimene, he used the terrain and clever ruses to lure the Romans into devastating ambushes, annihilating entire armies. But his masterpiece was yet to come. At the Battle of Cannae in 216 B.C., Hannibal faced a massive Roman force nearly twice the size of his own. The Roman commanders, confident in their numerical superiority, planned a simple, overwhelming frontal assault. Hannibal, in contrast, devised a tactic of sublime sophistication. He arranged his center infantry line in a convex arc, deliberately making it weaker than his flanks. As the Roman legions advanced, they pushed this center back, believing they were winning. But Hannibal had anticipated this. The convex line slowly inverted into a concave pocket, deliberately drawing the massive Roman army deeper into its embrace. Meanwhile, his superb Numidian and Spanish cavalry on the wings routed the Roman cavalry and, instead of pursuing them, swung around to attack the rear of the Roman infantry. who were now packed tightly together in the center. The Carthaginian army had effectively surrounded a much larger force. What followed was not a battle but a systematic slaughter. The Roman army was trapped so tightly that soldiers could not even raise their weapons. Estimates of Roman dead range from 50 to 70,000 men in a single day, a catastrophic loss that remains one of the worst military defeats in history. In the wake of such an unparalleled victory, a great mystery has captivated historians for centuries. Why did Hannibal not march on Rome itself? The city was defenseless, its armies shattered, its population gripped by panic. He had come all this way, sacrificed so much for this very moment. The traditional explanation offered by his cavalry commander Mahabal was that Hannibal knew how to gain a victory but not how to use one. But this is likely an oversimplification. The reality was far more complex. Hannibal's army, though brilliant, was a long way from home with tenuous supply lines. He lacked the sophisticated siege equipment necessary to breach Rome's formidable walls. More importantly, his entire strategy was based on a political calculation that Rome's Italian allies, who were not full citizens, would defect to him after seeing the Republic's weakness. He believed he could break Rome's confederation, isolating the city and causing its power to collapse from within. While some southern cities did join him, the core of the Italian alliance held firm. Marching on Rome without the means to take it, and without the widespread uprising he had hoped for, risked a costly failure that could shatter the aura of invincibility he had so carefully cultivated. It was a calculated, if ultimately fateful, decision to continue a war of attrition, hoping to win the political battle rather than risk everything on a single, desperate assault. What followed was a 15-year-long stalemate, a testament to Roman resilience. After the shock of Cannae wore off, the Romans adopted a strategy crafted by the senator Fabius Maximus, known as the delayer. They avoided pitched battles with Hannibal, instead harassing his supply lines and weakening his allies, all while rebuilding their own forces. The tide truly turned when a young Roman general, Publius Cornelius Scipio, who had studied Hannibal's tactics, took the war to Carthage's doorstep in Spain and then Africa. Forced to return home to defend his city, Hannibal finally met his match at the Battle of Zama in 202 B.C. There, facing Scipio, who had learned to neutralize his cavalry advantage, Hannibal was decisively defeated. The war was over. In the years that followed, he served Carthage as a political leader, but his enemies eventually forced him into exile. He spent his final years as a fugitive, advising various Eastern kings on how to fight the Romans, until, cornered by his eternal enemies, he chose to take his own life rather than be captured, declaring with his final breath, "Let us put an end to the great anxiety of the Romans, who have thought it too lengthy to wait for the death of a hated old man." Hannibal's legacy is profound. He became the ultimate archetype of the brilliant, doomed commander, a strategic genius whose understanding of maneuver and psychology is still taught in military academies. He was Rome's nightmare, but in challenging the Republic so profoundly, he inadvertently forged it into the relentless imperial power it would become. A final, ironic twist in the epic life of a man who devoted everything to a single, unfulfilled oath. While the story of Hannibal is one of a male commander leading armies across continents, the annals of ancient power reveal that the drive to shape history was not confined to the battlefield. In the corridors of the palace, through cunning and sheer force of will, a woman could wield influence that determined the fate of an empire. Our focus now shifts from the plains of Italy to the heart of the newly unified Han dynasty in China, to a figure whose name evokes both terror and awe, Empress Lu Zhai. As the formidable wife of Emperor Gyeozu, the founder of the Han dynasty, her story is a masterclass in political survival and ruthless realpolitik, proving that in the deadly game of imperial succession, the most dangerous threats often came from within the royal household itself. Lu Zhai's path to power was intrinsically linked to the rise of her husband, Liu Bang, a peasant rebel who rose to become Emperor Gaozu. She was his partner during the brutal civil wars that toppled the Qin dynasty, and she witnessed firsthand the betrayals and shifting alliances that characterized the era. This experience forged in her a steely pragmatism and a deep understanding that sentiment had no place in governance. When Gaozu unified China and established the Han dynasty in 202 B.C., Lu Zhai became his empress, but her position was far from secure. The emperor had a favored concubine, consort Kai, who had borne him a son, Liu Rui. The emperor's clear affection for this younger son began to threaten the position of Lu Zhai's own son, Liu Ying, the designated crown prince. This created a perilous situation. If consort Kai's son were named heir, Lu Zhai and her son would almost certainly be eliminated to secure the new succession line. The court became a simmering cauldron of factional intrigue, with Lu Zhai skillfully building a network of allies among senior ministers who were loyal to the principle of primogeniture and wary of the instability that would follow if the emperor set aside the eldest son. The death of Emperor Gaozu in 195 B.C. was the moment Lu Zhai's carefully laid plan snapped into action. Her son ascended the throne as Emperor Hui, but as a young and comparatively weak-willed man, real power flowed directly to his mother, who became the Empress Dowager and effective regent. Her first order of business was to eliminate any potential challenge to her son's rule, and her vengeance was swift and horrifying. She immediately targeted consort Kai, the woman who had been her rival for the emperor's affection, and more importantly, a threat to her son's throne. The historical records describe an act of chilling brutality. Lu Zhai had consort Kai imprisoned, her head shaved, and forced her to perform hard labor in the palace prison. But this was only the beginning. In an act designed to utterly break her rival's spirit and demonstrate her own absolute power, Lu Zhai then had consort Kai's limbs severed, her eyes gouged out, and her ears burned. She is said to have forced her to drink a potion that rendered her mute, and then had the mutilated woman thrown into a cesspit, referring to her as the human pig. This grotesque punishment was not merely an act of sadistic jealousy, it was a calculated piece of political theater. By visiting such an extreme and unforgettable fate upon her primary rival, Lu Zhai sent an unequivocal message to every other courtier and member of the imperial family. Defiance would be met with unimaginable horror. The story takes an even darker turn with the alleged fate of consort Kai's son, Liu Rui, the Prince of Zhao. Lu Zhai summoned the young prince to the capital, ostensibly for a visit. The new Emperor Hui, aware of his mother's intentions and possessing a kinder nature, tried to protect his half-brother. He kept the prince by his side at all times, even sharing his bed to prevent any foul play. But one morning, when the emperor went out hunting early, the prince, being younger, slept in. Lu Zhai seized this brief window of opportunity. She had the young prince poisoned before he could wake. When Emperor Hui returned, he found his half-brother dead. The incident shattered the young emperor, plunging him into a deep depression from which he never fully recovered. He reportedly abandoned state affairs, giving Lu Zhai even freer rein to consolidate her control. This sequence of events reveals the cold logic of her rule. The murder of Liu Rui was a necessary step to eliminate a rival claimant to the throne, a potential figurehead for rebellion. Her willingness to inflict such trauma upon her own son demonstrates that for Lu Zhai, the security of her political faction and her personal power ultimately outweighed any maternal instinct. Empress Lu's regency was defined by this ruthless efficiency. She systematically placed members of her own Lu clan into key government and military positions, sidelining the old ministers who had served her husband. She even arranged marriages between her family members and the imperial Liu clan to intertwine their bloodlines and secure their loyalty. While these actions were seen as a violation of the founding emperor's warning against empowering non-imperial relatives, her rule was not without its merits. Despite the brutal internal purges, she generally followed the policy of resting and recuperation established by Geazu, allowing the population and economy to recover from the wars that founded the dynasty. She maintained peace with the powerful nomadic Qiongnu Confederation to the north through shrewd diplomacy, avoiding costly military conflicts. In many ways, her administration provided a period of stability, but it was a stability enforced through fear and the ruthless elimination of dissent. The mystery that surrounds Empress Lu is not about her methods, which the histories record with grim detail, but about the ultimate judgment of her legacy. Traditional Chinese historiography, written by Confucian scholars who upheld strict patriarchal values, condemns her as a vicious usurper who violated the natural order by seizing power from the male Lu lineage. She is portrayed as the archetypal wicked queen, a cautionary tale about the dangers of women in politics, yet a more modern analysis reveals a more complex figure. In a system that offered women no formal route to power, she used the only tools available to her: intelligence, alliances, and relentless brutality. She navigated a profoundly treacherous political environment and held the Han dynasty together during a vulnerable transition, ensuring its survival long enough for it to become one of China's most enduring dynasties. Her story forces us to confront a difficult question. In the ruthless world of ancient statecraft, were her actions, however horrific, simply the price of maintaining order and securing her family's line? Empress Lu Jia did not lead armies, but through sheer political will, she controlled an empire, setting a precedent for female power that, though often vilified, would be quietly studied and occasionally emulated by women in the centuries that followed. From the ruthless political machinations of Empress Lu in China, we journey to a kingdom remembered not for its brutality, but for its almost mythical grandeur and divine wisdom. Our focus now turns to a ruler whose name has become a byword for sagacity and splendor, King Solomon of Israel. As the son and successor of the warrior King David, Solomon inherited a unified and secure kingdom, and his 40-year reign is portrayed in the Hebrew scriptures as a golden age of unprecedented peace, prosperity, and intellectual achievement. Unlike his father, who spent his life consolidating the kingdom through war, Solomon's legacy was built with the tools of commerce, diplomacy, and stone, transforming Jerusalem into a glittering capital that captivated the ancient world. The very foundation of Solomon's fame is his legendary wisdom. The most famous story illustrating this is the Judgment of Solomon, a masterpiece of psychological insight. Two women, both claiming to be the mother of the same infant, bring their dispute before the king. With no witnesses, the case seems impossible to solve. Solomon's proposed solution is shocking. He calls for a sword and declares that the living child shall be cut in two, with each woman receiving half. One woman immediately agrees to this horrific verdict, while the other cries out in anguish, begging the king to give the baby to her rival rather than see it killed. In that selfless plea, Solomon instantly recognizes the true mother, awarding her the child. This tale is more than a clever legal trick. It reveals a profound understanding of human nature, specifically the power of genuine maternal love over selfish possession. The biblical account states that this wisdom was a direct gift from God, granted to Solomon in a dream at Gibon, where he humbly asked for an understanding heart to govern his people rather than long life or riches. This divine wisdom was said to extend beyond jurisprudence to encompass encyclopedic knowledge of botany, zoology, and the composition of thousands of proverbs and songs, establishing his reputation as the ancient world's quintessential philosopher king. This wisdom was channeled into a project of monumental spiritual and political significance, the construction of the first temple in Jerusalem. His father, David, had desired to build a permanent house for the Ark of the Covenant, but was told by the prophet Nathan that the task would fall to his son. Solomon transformed this dream into a breathtaking reality. He leveraged his peaceful relations with King Hiram of Tyre, securing vast quantities of cedar and cypress wood from Lebanon, along with skilled Phoenician craftsmen. The construction was an international effort described in meticulous detail, featuring an ornate interior lined with gold and adorned with carved cherubim. The temple was not merely a place of worship, it was the ultimate symbol of divine favor and national unity. By centralizing the Israelite cult in Jerusalem, Solomon strengthened his own political control, making the capital the undisputed heart of the nation, both spiritually and administratively. The dedication ceremony, with the glory of God filling the temple as the ark was brought inside, represents the climax of his reign, a moment where heaven and earth were believed to meet in the city his father had conquered and he had glorified. Solomon's wealth was as legendary as his wisdom, and the Bible details its staggering sources. His kingdom sat astride major international trade routes, and he taxed the caravans passing between Egypt, Arabia, and Mesopotamia. He also built a fleet of ships at Ezion-Geber on the Red Sea, which, with the help of Hiram's sailors, embarked on lucrative voyages to a land called Ophir, returning every 3 years with vast quantities of gold, silver, almug wood, and precious stones. Perhaps his most famous commercial venture was his trade in horses and chariots, acting as a middleman between Egypt and the Hittite states. This commercial empire required a massive administrative structure, with 12 districts providing for the royal court each month. The description of his daily provisions is mind-boggling, and the visit of the Queen of Sheba, traveling from southwest Arabia with a caravan of spices, gold, and gems to test his wisdom, is presented as the ultimate validation of his international renown. Her awe at his wisdom and prosperity serves to illustrate that Solomon's fame had reached the very ends of the known world. Yet, for all his divinely granted wisdom, Solomon's reign contained the seeds of its own undoing, rooted in his diplomatic strategy. To secure his borders and foster alliances, he practiced large-scale political marriage, taking 700 wives and 300 concubines from foreign nations, including an Egyptian princess. While these marriages brought short-term peace, they came with a grave spiritual cost. To accommodate his foreign wives, Solomon permitted the construction of altars and high places for their gods, Ashtoreth of the Sidonians, Chemosh of the Moabites, and Melech of the Ammonites on the hills overlooking Jerusalem itself. The biblical narrative portrays this as a great sin, a turning away from the exclusive worship of the God of Israel that would ultimately lead to divine punishment. Upon Solomon's death, the northern tribes, already resentful of the heavy taxes and forced labor required for his grand projects, rebelled against his son Rehoboam, leading to the permanent division of the kingdom into Israel in the north and Judah in the south. The Golden Age was fleeting, shattered by the very policies that had helped create it. This compelling biblical portrait, however, stands in stark contrast to the challenging silence of the archaeological record, creating one of the most significant debates in biblical archaeology. The scriptures describe a vast, wealthy empire stretching from the Euphrates to the border of Egypt, yet the material evidence for such a grand 10th century BC kingdom is surprisingly elusive. Jerusalem from this period shows signs of being a significant regional capital, but not the metropolis of global importance described. There are no contemporary inscriptions bearing Solomon's name, and the impressive stables and gates once attributed to him at sites like Megiddo, Hazor, and Gezer are now dated by many archaeologists to the following century, to the time of the Omride dynasty in the northern kingdom of Israel. This has led to a scholarly divide. Some argue that the biblical account is a later, idealized projection from the 7th or 8th century BC, a piece of nationalistic literature designed to give the later kingdom of Judah a glorious past. Others propose a more modest interpretation, suggesting Solomon ruled a smaller but still influential chiefdom whose wealth and influence were amplified by later storytellers. This debate extends to the most tantalizing mystery of his wealth, the location of the legendary mines of Solomon. The Bible describes immense quantities of gold, so much that silver was said to be considered as common as stones in Jerusalem. But where did it all come from? The land of Ophir remains unidentified, with candidates ranging from India to East Africa. A more recent and compelling theory points to the copper mines of a place called Khurbat-en-Nahas in modern-day Jordan, in the ancient kingdom of Edom. Extensive archaeological work there has revealed a massive copper production center that was operating at an industrial scale in the 10th century BC, exactly the time of Solomon. While there is no direct inscription linking Solomon to this site, the timing and scale of the operation fit the biblical description of a king who controlled the region and possessed great mineral wealth. It is possible that the legend of Solomon's mines is a folk memory of this period of intense copper production, a metal that was, in the Bronze and Iron Ages, as valuable as gold. The true source of Solomon's riches may therefore lie not in elusive gold mines, but in the control of strategic trade routes and the industrial-scale processing of a metal that was the backbone of ancient economies, leaving us with a historical puzzle as intriguing as the wisest king's most famous riddle. From the golden legend of Solomon, we travel to a tale where gold itself becomes both a blessing and a curse, a story that has captivated the world for millennia. The figure of King Midas of Phrygia stands as one of antiquity's most enduring archetypes, a ruler whose very name is synonymous with the dangerous allure of wealth. But behind the famous myth of the Midas touch, where everything he laid his hands upon turned to gold, lies a fascinating historical puzzle. Was there a real king who inspired this story, and what can archaeology tell us about the powerful kingdom he might have ruled? The legend, as told by the Greeks, is a moral fable about the perils of unchecked greed. In the most common version, the god Dionysus grants Midas a wish as a reward for a kindness. Overjoyed, Midas asks that everything he touches turn to gold. His wish is granted, and he initially revels in his power, turning stones and twigs into precious metal. But the triumph quickly turns to horror when he discovers that even his food and water transform the moment they touch his lips, and most tragically, when he embraces his beloved daughter, she too turns into a golden statue. In his despair, Midas begs Dionysus to take back the gift, and he is instructed to wash in the river Pactolus. As he does so, the power flows from him into the river, whose sands were famously said to be rich with gold dust from that day forward. This story transcends a simple warning about greed. It explores a profound truth about the nature of value. Gold, for all its glitter, is useless for sustaining life. Midas's wish fundamentally confused monetary wealth with real, tangible prosperity, a lesson that resonates as powerfully today as it did in the ancient world. The search for the historical Midas begins with the Greeks themselves, who treated him not as a pure myth but as a figure from their distant past, interacting with them during the period of their early colonization. Greek historians placed his reign in Phrygia, a powerful kingdom located in the central highlands of Anatolia, what is now Turkey, during the 8th or early 7th century before the Common Era. This was a time when Phrygia was a major rival to the rising power of Assyria to the east. Intriguingly, Assyrian records from this period mention a king named Mita of Mushki, who fought a series of campaigns against the Assyrian Emperor Sargon II. Most scholars agree that Mita of Mushki is the Assyrian rendering of Midas of Phrygia, providing a tantalizing independent confirmation that a powerful king by that name did indeed exist. This connection pulls the figure of Midas from the realm of pure fantasy into the light of documented history, a real player in the brutal geopolitics of the Iron Age. If Midas was a historical figure, then his capital was almost certainly the city of Gordian, and it is here that archaeology has shed remarkable light on his world. Excavations at Gordian, situated near the Sangarius River, have revealed the remains of a wealthy and sophisticated citadel. The most spectacular discovery came in 1957, when archaeologists uncovered an enormous burial mound known as the Midas Mound or Tumulus MMM. This tomb, dating to around 740 before the Common Era, was untouched by looters, its wooden burial chamber perfectly preserved under a massive pile of earth and stone. Inside, they found the skeleton of a man between 60 and 65 years old, lying on a pile of dyed textiles within a magnificent log coffin. The grave goods were staggering, not for golden statues, but for their refined craftsmanship and clear evidence of wealth and extensive trade networks. There were ornate bronze vessels, intricately carved wooden furniture inlaid with geometric patterns, and over 150 bronze vessels. This was the burial of a paramount chief or king, a man of immense status who ruled during the very period the historical Midas was active. While we can never be certain the tomb belongs to the specific Midas of legend, it undeniably contains a king from the era of the legendary Midas, offering us a direct window into the world that created the myth. So how did this historical king become the figure of the Golden Touch? The answer likely lies in the very real sources of Phrygian prosperity. The kingdom controlled rich mineral deposits, particularly in the region around the river Pactolus, which indeed carried gold dust in its waters from mineral deposits upstream. The Phrygians were master metalworkers, and their wealth was built on controlling and trading these valuable resources. The legend of the Midas touch, then, can be seen as a poetic exaggeration of this tangible economic reality. To the Greeks encountering Phrygian traders or ambassadors laden with golden objects, the kingdom of Midas must have seemed like a place where gold was as common as dust. The myth immortalized this perception, transforming Phrygia's very real mineral wealth into a supernatural curse. It is a classic case of a culture explaining the almost unbelievable richness of a foreign power through a divine, if cautionary, story. The historical Midas was not a man cursed with gold, but a canny ruler who mastered the sources of his land's wealth, leaving behind a legacy so potent that it could only be explained by the gods themselves. From the legendary wealth of Midas, we now turn to a ruler whose ambition was forged not in gold, but in the intricate and ruthless world of the Chinese imperial court. Our journey brings us to the Tang dynasty, a period often considered the zenith of Chinese civilization, and to a figure who shattered one of history's most rigid barriers, Empress Wu Zetian. She stands alone in the annals of China, the only woman ever to ascend the throne and rule as emperor in her own right, a title she claimed not through birthright as a princess, but through a breathtaking display of political genius, relentless ambition, and a mastery of propaganda that rewrote the very rules of power. Wu Zetian's path to the pinnacle was as unconventional as it was audacious. She entered the court of Emperor Taizong as a low-ranking concubine, one of countless young women in the imperial harem. Her intelligence and beauty were noted, but it was after Taizong's death, when custom dictated she should have spent the rest of her life in a convent as a nun, that her political cunning truly emerged. She managed to captivate Taizong's son and successor, Emperor Gaozong, who brought her back to the palace, elevating her above his own empress. What followed was a masterclass in palace intrigue. Wu Zetian, according to traditional histories, stopped at nothing to clear her path. The most infamous accusation, one that has defined her reputation for centuries, is that she murdered her own infant daughter and framed the sitting empress for the crime. Whether this story is factual or a later fabrication by her Confucian critics, it highlights the perceived lengths of her ruthlessness. Gaozong, convinced of the empress's guilt, deposed her and installed Wu Zetian in her place. But her ambition reached far beyond the title of empress consort. As Gaozong suffered from debilitating health issues, often described as strokes or severe headaches, Wu Zetian began to act as his regent, gradually assuming the full duties of governance from behind a screen in the throne room. She was no mere placeholder. She immersed herself in the details of statecraft, mastering the complex bureaucracy and building a network of loyal officials who appreciated her sharp intellect and decisive leadership. When Emperor Gaozong died, Wu Zetian did not fade into the background as a dutiful dowager empress. Instead, she systematically removed her own sons who briefly succeeded their father, ruling as the power behind the throne until she finally took the ultimate step. In 690, after a sophisticated campaign of political theater and manufactured omens suggesting a divine mandate, she formally deposed her son, ended the Tang dynasty, and proclaimed a new Zhou dynasty with herself as the sacred and divine emperor. This was an act of unparalleled boldness. To justify a woman holding the masculine title of emperor or Huangdi, she turned to statecraft's most powerful tool, propaganda. She became a fervent patron of Buddhism, commissioning the creation of colossal statues and temples, most famously the Longmen grottos. She promoted a Buddhist sutra that contained a story of a benevolent female ruler, a future Buddha-like figure who would reign over a golden age, implicitly casting herself as this prophesied savior. This provided a crucial religious and ideological foundation for her unprecedented rule, positioning her not as a usurper of the natural order, but as its fulfillment. Her most ingenious and lasting act of propaganda, however, involved the written word itself. She commissioned scholars to create a series of entirely new Chinese characters. These were not minor adjustments, but bold reinventions of core characters, including the character for her own name. The most significant of these was a new character for ruler or sovereign. This project served multiple purposes. It was a brilliant display of her cultural authority, demonstrating that her power extended to the very language of the state. It also functioned as a loyalty test. Officials were required to learn and use the new characters, and failure to do so could be seen as dissent. But perhaps most cleverly, it created a distinct visual identity for her reign, a way to mark documents and monuments from her era as fundamentally different from those that came before, literally rewriting the landscape of power to reflect her unique authority. Yet, for all her efforts to control her legacy, Empress Wu Zetian left behind one of history's most profound and enigmatic statements, a blank stele. Nearing the end of her long life and forced to abdicate in favor of her restored son, she ordered a monument to be erected at her tomb, the Qianling Mausoleum. Unlike every other emperor before her, whose stone tablets were inscribed with lists of their achievements for posterity to judge, Wu Zetian's stele was left completely blank. This was not an oversight. It was a deliberate, final act of supreme confidence and profound mystery. Some interpretations suggest it was an admission of the impossibility of summarizing such a complex reign, or an acknowledgement that her actions, particularly the ruthless methods she employed, were beyond simple moral judgment. Others see it as the ultimate act of defiance, a declaration that her legacy was so vast and transformative that no words could adequately contain it, and that only the judgment of future generations would be capable of assessing her true impact. The blank stele stands as a silent challenge to history, inviting endless interpretation and ensuring that the debate over her character, was she a vicious usurper who poisoned her way to power, or a brilliant administrator who presided over a period of military expansion, cultural flourishing, and relative stability, would continue forever. In the end, Wu Zetian understood that the most powerful narratives are sometimes the ones we are forced to write for ourselves. From the calculated statecraft of Wu Zetian, we now turn to a force of nature that erupted from the steppes of Central Asia, a leader whose very name became a synonym for terror in the fading days of the Roman Empire. Attila the Hun was not an emperor who built cities or commissioned great art. His legacy was forged in the fire and steel of relentless conquest, earning him the chilling title Scourge of God from a terrified Christendom. He ruled a nomadic confederation so alien to the settled civilizations of Rome and Constantinople that his arrival seemed to signal the end of the world itself, a whirlwind of destruction that pushed the ancient order to the brink of collapse. Attila's power was not rooted in the bureaucracy of a palace but in the saddle of a horse, and his military might was built upon the unique advantages of his people, the Huns. They were masters of mounted warfare, living their entire lives in harmony with their tough steppe ponies. From childhood, they learned to ride with an almost supernatural skill, able to guide their horses with their knees while freeing both hands to fire a composite bow with devastating accuracy. This gave them a mobility that the heavy, infantry-based Roman legions could not hope to match. A Hun warrior could unleash a storm of arrows while maneuvering at a full gallop, a tactic designed to harass, disorganize, and demoralize an enemy long before close combat ever began. Their strategy was one of fluidity and shock. They would feign retreat, luring disciplined Roman formations into chaotic pursuits, only to suddenly wheel around and engulf them from all sides. This was not a war of set-piece battles for glory. It was a form of military terror designed to inflict maximum damage, plunder wealth, and shatter the enemy's will to resist. To the Romans, it was a nightmare form of combat, dishonorable and unpredictable, which made it all the more effective. The terror Attila inspired was as potent a weapon as his armies. Roman historians, writing from the relative safety of their villas, painted a grotesque portrait of the Huns, describing them as barely human creatures, stunted and ugly, who ate raw meat softened by being carried under their saddles, and who never entered a house for fear of the roof collapsing on them. While these descriptions are clearly exaggerated propaganda, they reveal a deep-seated psychological fear. Attila himself cultivated an aura of invincibility and divine favor. He claimed to possess the actual sword of the war god Mars, which a shepherd had supposedly discovered after it had been lost for centuries and presented to him, an event he used to proclaim his destiny as the ruler of the entire world. His capital was not a city of marble, but a massive village of wooden buildings on the Great Hungarian Plain, where he lived in a large log palace while his subjects remained in their wagons. It was from this mobile base that he extorted vast sums of gold from the Eastern Roman Empire in Constantinople, threatening annihilation if his tribute was not paid. The sheer scale of this extortion, thousands of pounds of gold, drained the imperial treasury and demonstrated that the mighty Roman Empire was now forced to pay protection money to a man it considered a barbarian king. The climax of Attila's campaign of terror came in the year 451, when he turned his immense horde westward, crossing the Rhine River into Gaul. His stated reason was a bizarre romantic pretext. He claimed he was invading to claim the hand of Honoria, the sister of the Western Roman Emperor Valentinian III, who had supposedly sent him a ring and asked for his help. Whether this was a genuine motivation or a cynical excuse for plunder, the result was an invasion on a scale not seen since the days of the Germanic migrations. Attila's forces, a colossal alliance of Huns and various Germanic tribes like the Ostrogoths, swept through the countryside, laying waste to cities like Metz. The entire West seemed poised to fall. In response, the Romans performed a diplomatic miracle, forging an alliance with their own former enemies, the Visigoths, who had settled in southwestern Gaul. The two armies, Roman and Visigoth, met Attila's confederation at the Catalonian plains in a battle of unimaginable ferocity. It was not a clash of tactics but a brutal slogging match, a chaotic melee that lasted an entire day and left the fields choked with the dead, including the Visigothic king Theodoric. The battle was so costly that Attila was forced to withdraw back across the Rhine. Though not a clear victory for either side, it had stopped the Hun advance. For the first time, Attila the Hun had been checked. Undeterred, Attila invaded Italy the very next year, burning cities like Aquileia so thoroughly that survivors fled to the lagoons, an event that legend says led to the founding of Venice. He marched on Rome itself and the world held its breath, but then something extraordinary happened. Instead of sacking the eternal city, Attila turned back. The reason has been a source of speculation for centuries. The traditional story credits Pope Leo I, who met the Hun king outside the city gates. Through the sheer force of his presence and spiritual authority, Leo is said to have persuaded Attila to spare Rome. While the Pope's intervention likely played a role, more practical considerations were probably decisive. Attila's army was suffering from disease and shortages of food in the war-ravaged Italian countryside. Furthermore, reinforcements from the Eastern Roman Empire were rumored to be on their way. The combination of diplomacy, logistics, and threat likely convinced the pragmatic Attila to accept a tribute and withdraw. His retreat was seen as a miraculous deliverance for Rome, cementing the authority of the papacy, but it was only a temporary reprieve. The final chapter of Attila's life is as shrouded in mystery and dramatic irony as any in history. After returning to his base on the plains, he took a new, young bride named Ildiko. The wedding feast was a massive celebration, and according to the historian Priscus, who had actually met Attila, the king retired to his bridal chamber in high spirits after heavy drinking. The next morning, when he failed to appear, his guards broke down the door. They found Attila dead with his terrified bride weeping beside him. There was no sign of a wound. The cause of death was a massive nosebleed. He had apparently choked on his own blood after a night of revelry. The mighty scourge of God, who had brought empires to their knees, had fallen not to a rival sword, but to a mundane hemorrhage on his wedding night. It was an end so bizarrely anticlimactic that it has fueled theories of assassination or poisoning for centuries, though the account of a natural death remains the most plausible. The empire Attila had built, held together solely by the force of his own terrifying personality, did not survive him. He had left no clear succession plan, and his numerous sons immediately began fighting among themselves for the remnants of his domain. Without Attila's unifying leadership, the delicate alliance of Hun and Germanic tribes quickly shattered. The subjected peoples rose in rebellion, and within a year, the Hunnic Empire had disintegrated, its components scattering back across the steppes from whence they came. Attila left no monuments, no laws, and no lasting political structure. His legacy was one of pure, unadulterated impact, a seismic event that accelerated the decline of the Western Roman Empire by demonstrating its profound vulnerability. He became a figure of legend, a symbol of savage fury in European folklore, but also a paradoxical symbol of kingship in some Germanic sagas, where he is remembered not as a monster, but as a generous and powerful lord named Atli. This duality captures the essence of Attila the Hun, a historical whirlwind who passed as quickly as he arrived, leaving behind a trail of destruction and a mystery that continues to captivate us. A reminder that the most fleeting forces can sometimes leave the deepest scars on the canvas of history. From the chaotic whirlwind of Attila's horde, we travel to an earlier age of burgeoning commerce and legendary wealth, to a kingdom where the very concept of money was being invented. Our journey takes us to the ancient kingdom of Lydia, nestled in the fertile valleys of western Anatolia, and to its most famous ruler, a man whose name has echoed for millennia as the very definition of affluence, King Croesus. His story is a fascinating blend of undeniable historical innovation and a poignant moral tale about the limits of wealth, a cautionary narrative that warns that even the richest king cannot always buy a favorable destiny. The source of Croesus's immense fortune was as tangible as it was revolutionary. Gold. The rivers of his kingdom, particularly the Pactolus, were famous for carrying electrum, a natural alloy of gold and silver, washed down from the rich deposits of Mount Tmolus. While previous rulers had used electrum in trade, Croesus had a brilliant idea that would fundamentally change the world economy. He instituted the first official standardized coinage system in history. His government purified the electrum, separating it into pure gold and pure silver, and then minted coins of consistent weight and purity, each stamped with the royal insignia of a lion and a bull. This was a monumental leap forward. Before Croesus, trade relied on barter or weighing out unmarked lumps of precious metal, a process ripe with uncertainty and fraud. His coins created a universal medium of exchange, a guaranteed value that was recognized and trusted far beyond Lydia's borders. This innovation supercharged commerce, making Sardis, his capital, a dazzling crossroads of trade between the Greek city-states of the coast and the great empires of the east. The phrase, "rich as Croesus," was not just a saying. It was a reflection of a very real economic revolution that placed Lydia at the center of the ancient world's financial networks. Yet, for all his wealth, Croesus was deeply concerned with matters beyond mere commerce. He was a generous benefactor to the great religious centers of the Greek world, sending spectacular gifts of solid gold to the oracle of Apollo at Delphi. This relationship sets the stage for one of the most famous and fateful consultations in history. By the mid-6th century before the Common Era, a new power was rising to the east, the Persian Empire under its brilliant and ambitious king, Cyrus the Great. Watching Cyrus's relentless expansion, Croesus grew anxious. He debated whether to launch a preemptive strike against this growing threat. To guide his decision, he decided to test the oracles of the world. He sent messengers to several famous oracles, instructing them to ask on the 100th day after their departure what the king of Lydia was doing at that very moment. The only oracle to get it right was the Pythia at Delphi, who declared, "I know the number of the sands and the measure of the sea. I understand the mute and hear him who does not speak. My senses are struck by the smell of a hard-shelled tortoise being cooked in a bronze pot with lamb's flesh, bronze above and below." Astonishingly, Croesus had been engaged in this exact bizarre culinary experiment, hoping to concoct the most improbable thing an oracle could divine. Convinced of Delphi's infallibility, he then asked his real question: should he wage war on Persia? The reply from the oracle was, as always, cryptic. "If you cross the river Halys, you will destroy a great empire." Interpreting this as a clear promise of victory, Croesus mobilized his famously wealthy army and crossed the Halys River into Persian territory. The great empire he destroyed, however, was his own. After an inconclusive battle, Croesus retreated to Sardis for the winter, expecting Cyrus to do the same. But Cyrus, a master of unpredictable warfare, pursued him, leading to a final confrontation outside the Lydian capital. The decisive moment came when Cyrus, in a stroke of tactical genius, ordered his cavalry to dismount and advance on foot, following a line of camels he placed at the front of his army. The unfamiliar sight and smell of the camels spooked the renowned Lydian horses, throwing their cavalry into disarray and leading to a swift Persian victory. Sardis was sacked, and the legendary wealth of Croesus fell into the hands of Cyrus. What happened next to the captured king is where history merges with powerful legend, creating an enduring mystery. The Greek historian Herodotus provides a dramatic account that has shaped Croesus's image for 2,000 years. As Cyrus prepared to burn Croesus alive on a great pyre, the fallen Lydian king, surrounded by flames, remembered the words of the Athenian sage Solon, who had once visited his court and warned that no man could be called truly happy until his life had ended well. As the fire licked at his feet, Croesus cried out Solon's name 3 times. Intrigued, Cyrus ordered the flames to be extinguished, but they had grown too fierce. According to Herodotus, the god Apollo, answering Croesus's earlier generosity, then sent a miraculous rainstorm to douse the fire. Humbled by this divine intervention and Croesus's wisdom, Cyrus not only spared his life but made him a trusted advisor for the remainder of his days. This story is a perfect Greek tragedy, exploring the themes of hubris, the folly of misunderstanding divine messages, and the ultimate lesson that wealth is no shield against fate. The historical reality, however, is far less certain. Babylonian chronicles, which record Cyrus's conquest of Lydia, make no mention of Croesus being killed, suggesting he may have indeed been spared. But the cozy ending of him as a wise counselor is likely a Greek literary invention. The ultimate fate of Croesus remains one of history's quiet enigmas. Did he live out his days in comfortable Persian captivity? Was he executed discreetly after the revolt? The archaeological record offers no clear answer. The mystery of his end, however, does nothing to diminish the certainty of his beginning. The gold coins of Croesus, with their iconic lion and bull, have been found in excavations across the Mediterranean, silent, shimmering proof of the economic revolution he set in motion. His true legacy, then, is not the tragic moral of a misunderstood oracle, but the very idea of certified value, a concept so fundamental to our modern world that we still carry its echo in our pockets every day. Leaving behind the shattered empire of the Huns, we venture into a realm where a king's historical insignificance was utterly transformed by the contents of a single sealed chamber. Our journey now takes us to the banks of the Nile during the tumultuous 18th dynasty, to a boy king whose name would have been a minor footnote in the annals of Egypt were it not for a discovery that captured the world's imagination: Tutankhamun. His reign was brief, his political power likely limited, yet the discovery of his final resting place would make him the most famous pharaoh of all, a golden mask that has come to symbolize the entire civilization of ancient Egypt. Tutankhamun's story begins in the shadow of a religious revolution that shattered the foundations of Egyptian society. He was likely the son of the heretic pharaoh Akhenaten, who had abandoned the traditional pantheon of gods with its powerful priesthood of Amun to worship a single deity, the sun disk Aten. Akhenaten moved the capital to a new city, Amarna, and enforced his monotheistic vision with a power that alienated the established religious orders. When Tutankhamun ascended the throne around the age of 8 or 9, originally under the name Tutankhaten, meaning living image of Aten, he inherited a kingdom in crisis. The traditional temples were neglected, and the state was weakened both domestically and internationally. The young king, guided by powerful advisors like the General Horemheb and the courtier Ai, made a momentous decision. He abandoned the city of Amarna, restored the capital to Thebes, and began a program of dramatic restoration. He changed his name to Tutankhamun, living image of Amun, and issued a decree, the Restoration Stela, that detailed his efforts to repair the damaged temples, re-establish the cults of the old gods, and return Egypt to its traditional religious path. This was not a personal theological awakening from a child, but a calculated political move to stabilize a fractured nation, a return to orthodoxy orchestrated by the elders who truly held the reins of power. The mystery of his lineage is as captivating as his policies. For decades, the identity of Tutankhamun's parents was one of Egyptology's great puzzles. Was he the son of Akhenaten and his famed queen, Nefertiti, or perhaps a son of Akhenaten by a minor wife? DNA analysis conducted on his mummy and others from the period has provided tantalizing answers, revealing that his father was indeed the mummy known as KV55, almost certainly Akhenaten. His mother was identified as a mummy dubbed the Younger Lady, a full sister of Akhenaten, making Tutankhamun the product of generations of royal incest, a practice common among the pharaohs to preserve the divine bloodline. This genetic heritage, however, came at a terrible cost. The forensic examination of his body revealed a young man afflicted with multiple maladies, including a clubbed foot that would have required him to use a cane, several of which were found in his tomb, and a weakened immune system. He also suffered from malaria. These factors, combined with a severe compound fracture in his left leg, likely led to a fatal infection. His death around the age of 18 or 19 was not the result of foul play, as once speculated, but a tragic consequence of a fragile body, ending a reign of just 9 or 10 years. Because his reign was so short, Tutankhamun was buried in a tomb that was probably intended for a high official, not a pharaoh. It was small, relatively undecorated, and located in an area of the Valley of the Kings that was soon covered by debris from later tomb constructions. This obscurity, this historical accident, is precisely what saved it. While the grand tombs of mighty pharaohs like Ramesses the Great were looted within centuries, Tutankhamun's humble resting place was forgotten, its entrance buried and lost to time for over 3,000 years. That is, until November 4, 1922, when British archaeologist Howard Carter, funded by Lord Carnarvon, discovered a single step cut into the rock. The telegram Carter sent to Carnarvon read, "At last have made wonderful discovery in valley, a magnificent tomb with seals intact. The world held its breath." When Carter first peered into the antechamber by candlelight, Carnarvon anxiously asking, "Can you see anything?" Carter famously replied, "Yes, wonderful things." The contents of those 4 small chambers were beyond anything anyone could have imagined. It was not merely the gold, though there was an astonishing 5,000 objects, including the solid gold coffin and the iconic 11-kilogram funerary mask. It was the breathtaking snapshot of an entire pharaonic court frozen in time. There were golden chariots disassembled but ready for use in the afterlife. There were intricately carved alabaster vessels, a gilded throne, beds, board games, and even a lock of his grandmother's hair. There were provisions of food and wine, and dozens of statues of gods and magical guardian figures meant to protect the king on his journey to the underworld. This was not just a treasure trove, it was a time capsule of unimaginable completeness, offering an unparalleled window into the material culture, art, and religious beliefs of the new kingdom. The discovery ignited a global frenzy of Egyptomania, influencing art, architecture, and fashion, and cementing the romance of archaeology in the public mind forever. Yet, with this incredible discovery came one of the 20th century's most enduring legends, the Curse of the Pharaohs. The myth was born when Lord Carnarvon, the financial backer of the excavation, died just a few months after the tomb's opening from an infected mosquito bite, compounded by pre-existing health issues. At the moment of his death in Cairo, the lights allegedly flickered and went out across the city, and back in England, his dog was said to have howled and dropped dead. Sensationalist newspapers, hungry for a story, seized upon these coincidences, publishing a supposed inscription from the tomb's entrance: "Death shall come on swift wings to him who disturbs the peace of the king." No such inscription was ever found by Carter or anyone else, but the legend took on a life of its own. Every subsequent death of anyone remotely connected to the excavation was attributed to the curse, creating a narrative of supernatural vengeance that persists to this day. In reality, the curse was a brilliant piece of media fabrication. Howard Carter, the man who spent the most time in the tomb and physically handled the mummy, lived for another 17 years, dying of natural causes at the age of 64. Most of the other team members also lived long lives. Scientifically, the idea of a curse has been explained by modern biologists as the potential effect of ancient, sealed environments. They suggest that toxic spores of mold or bacteria could have been sealed in the tomb for millennia, potentially causing respiratory illness in those who first breached the chamber, a phenomenon now known as tomb toxins. But for the public, the curse was far more compelling than a simple mold allergy. It tapped into a deep-seated Western fascination with the exotic and the occult, and a subconscious fear of violating the sacred rest of the dead. The curse, in the end, tells us less about ancient Egypt and more about our own modern anxieties and our love for a thrilling story. Tutankhamun's true legacy, therefore, is a paradox. He was a minor king, a fleeting ruler whose attempt to restore the old ways was quickly overshadowed by the generals who followed him. But through a twist of fate, his undisturbed tomb granted him an immortality that the great pyramid builders could only dream of, making him not a powerful god-king in history, but an eternal icon in our collective imagination. But from the ashes of a king's forgotten tomb, we now turn to a story written not in gold, but in blood and iron, a legend born not in a palace but in the brutal confines of a gladiator school. Our focus shifts to the final century of the Roman Republic, to a man whose name would become the eternal cry of the oppressed, Spartacus. His was not a war for territory or a throne, but a desperate, audacious struggle for the most basic human right, freedom itself, a rebellion that tapped into the deepest, most brutal contradiction at the heart of the Roman world, an economy and society built entirely on the backs of millions of enslaved people. Spartacus's journey to infamy began in Thrace, a land north of Greece known for producing fierce warriors. He himself had once fought alongside, or perhaps even against, Roman legions, an experience that gave him an intimate understanding of their tactics and discipline. For reasons lost to time, he was captured and enslaved, and his martial prowess destined him for the most dreadful fate imaginable, the gladiator schools of Capua. These were not mere training grounds, they were human stockyards designed to break the spirit and forge men into living weapons for the entertainment of the Roman masses. Life here was a relentless cycle of brutal training and the constant threat of death in the arena. It was in this crucible of humiliation and violence, in the year 73 before the Common Era, that Spartacus, along with a small band of about 70 fellow gladiators, plotted an escape. Using kitchen implements as weapons, they fought their way out of the school, seized a wagon of gladiatorial equipment, and fled to the slopes of Mount Vesuvius, which was then not a dormant giant but a quiet, forested mountain. This small act of defiance was the spark that would ignite a wildfire. What began as a desperate bid for freedom quickly evolved into a full-scale war. As news of the escape spread, thousands of enslaved farmhands, shepherds, and miners from the vast, oppressive agricultural estates of southern Italy flocked to Spartacus's banner. This was not a unified army in the Roman sense. It was a massive, chaotic movement of the desperate. Yet, under the leadership of Spartacus and his commanders, the Gauls Crixus and Oenomaus, this ragtag force was forged into a surprisingly effective fighting machine. Spartacus's genius lay in his ability to adapt. He knew his followers could not defeat the legions in a straightforward, set-piece battle. Instead, he employed guerrilla tactics, using the rugged Italian countryside to his advantage. When a Roman militia under the praetor Clodius Glaber besieged the rebels on Vesuvius, blockading the only known path, Spartacus demonstrated his tactical creativity. He had his men weave ropes from wild vines, scaling down the sheer cliffs of the volcano under cover of darkness to attack the Roman camp from the rear, routing the unprepared soldiers completely. This victory provided them with proper Roman arms and armor, transforming the rebellion from a fugitive band into a genuine military threat. Over the next 2 years, Spartacus's army, which swelled to perhaps 70,000 people, including women and children, rampaged across Italy. They defeated 2 more Roman armies sent against them, and their reputation grew to mythical proportions. The rebels were not just fighting for their lives, they were settling scores. They ravaged the countryside, specifically targeting the villas and estates of the wealthy slave owners who represented their oppression. The Roman heartland, which had not seen a foreign enemy since Hannibal's invasion over a century earlier, was thrown into a panic. The social and economic system of the entire region was threatened. Yet, a great mystery surrounds Spartacus's ultimate goal. The historian Plutarch suggests he tried to lead his followers north, out of Italy and across the Alps, to disperse to their homelands in Gaul and Thrace. This was the most logical strategy for a force seeking simple escape, but after successfully fighting their way to the foothills of the Alps, the army, perhaps emboldened by their success or tempted by the plunder of Italy, turned back south. This decision was a fatal turning point. It transformed the rebellion from a mass breakout into a direct and ultimately unsustainable challenge to Roman power itself. The Senate, now realizing the gravity of the threat, turned to its wealthiest and most ruthless politician, Marcus Licinius Crassus. A man of immense ambition, Crassus saw the slave war as an opportunity to gain the military glory he needed to rival his contemporaries Pompey and Julius Caesar. He took command of 8 legions and instituted the ancient punishment of decimation upon his own troops after an early setback, having every 10th man in a disgraced unit beaten to death by his comrades to restore discipline. This act of brutal severity demonstrated the stakes for Rome. Crassus then methodically cornered the rebel army in the southern toe of Italy, building a massive fortification, a wall and ditch across the entire Bruttian Peninsula to trap them. In a daring night maneuver, Spartacus managed to break through a section of these lines, but the noose was tightening. The final battle took place in 71 before the Common Era, near the headwaters of the Sila River in Lucania. Knowing the end was near, Spartacus reportedly killed his own horse before the battle, declaring that if he won, he would have many fine horses to choose from, and if he lost, he would have no need of one. He then fought his way directly toward Crassus himself, determined to strike at the head of the snake. The historical accounts describe him cutting down 2 centurions who stood in his path before he was finally overwhelmed and cut down by the sheer mass of Roman soldiers. The aftermath was as brutal as the war itself. Crassus, wanting to make an unforgettable example, ordered 6,000 captured rebels crucified along the entire length of the Appian Way, the main road from Capua to Rome. For miles, the rotting bodies lined the route, a gruesome warning to any who would dare challenge the established order. Yet, for all this finality, Spartacus himself achieved a form of immortality through disappearance. In the chaos of the final battle, his body was never formally identified. The Romans could not produce their greatest enemy's corpse as a trophy. This absence is the final, powerful mystery of his story. Was his body so mutilated it was unrecognizable? Was it stripped and looted by common soldiers in the melee? Or did the legend hold that he somehow escaped the slaughter? This lack of a definitive end allowed the myth of Spartacus to flourish. He could not be contained by a Roman tomb or a triumphal procession. Instead, he transcended his death to become a universal symbol of resistance against overwhelming power, an inspiration for countless movements throughout history, from Haitian revolutionaries to abolitionists, proving that the most powerful legacy is sometimes not a body to bury, but an idea that refuses to die. But from the slave revolt that shook Italy, we journey east to a conflict on an altogether different scale, a clash of civilizations that pitted the colossal power of the Persian Empire against the defiant city-states of ancient Greece. Here we encounter a ruler whose ambition was as vast as his domain, a king whose very name evokes the image of an almost limitless empire in motion, Xerxes I. His story is one of monumental engineering, legendary battles, and a hubris that would ultimately mark a turning point for the ancient world, a narrative forever shaped by the pen of the Greek historian Herodotus and later amplified by the dramatic lens of Hollywood. Xerxes inherited an empire at its zenith from his father, the great Darius, but he also inherited a simmering conflict. Darius's earlier invasion of Greece had ended in a stunning defeat at the Battle of Marathon, a humiliation that demanded a response. For Xerxes, this was not just a matter of revenge. It was about completing his father's vision and solidifying the western borders of an empire that already stretched from the Indus Valley to the Aegean Sea. He spent years planning an invasion of unprecedented scale, a campaign designed to overwhelm the Greeks through sheer, undeniable force. The army and navy he assembled were, according to ancient sources, of almost mythical proportions. Herodotus, likely exaggerating for effect, describes a force of over 2 million soldiers and a navy of 1,200 ships, a number so vast it defies modern logistical understanding. Yet, even if the true figure was a fraction of that, it was undoubtedly the largest military expedition the world had ever seen, a multicultural behemoth drawn from every corner of the empire: Medes, Egyptians, Babylonians, and Ethiopians, a living map of Persian power marching westward. The first and most breathtaking demonstration of this power was not a battle, but a feat of engineering that bordered on the divine. To move his massive army from Asia into Europe, Xerxes needed to cross the Hellespont, the narrow strait separating the two continents, what we know today as the Dardanelles. A conventional ferry operation would have been impossibly slow and vulnerable, so Xerxes's engineers conceived a project of staggering ambition. They would bridge the sea itself. They constructed not one, but two parallel pontoon bridges by lashing together hundreds of ships, both warships and merchant vessels, side by side across the mile-wide strait. These floating platforms were then anchored and covered with a roadbed of compacted earth and wooden planks, creating a stable causeway high enough for his army to march across, with fences on either side to prevent the animals from being spooked by the water below. The story, however, takes a dramatic turn. According to Herodotus, a powerful storm arose and shattered the first attempt. In a fit of rage that perfectly captures the absolute power of an Eastern monarch, Xerxes ordered the Hellespont itself to be punished. He commanded that the water be given 300 lashes and that a pair of fetters be thrown into the sea as a symbol of its subjugation. He even sent men to brand the water with hot irons. This act of punishing the sea is the ultimate representation of human hubris, the belief that even nature must bow to the will of the king. The bridges were eventually rebuilt and the army crossed into Europe, a spectacle that took 7 days and nights to complete, a river of humanity flowing from one continent to another. The invasion's first major land confrontation has become the stuff of legend, a story of valor that has been told and retold for 2,500 years, the Battle of Thermopylae. Xerxes's army advanced south until it reached this narrow coastal pass, the Hot Gates, where the geography funneled his overwhelming numerical advantage into a confined space. Blocking his path was a small force of roughly 7,000 Greek allies, led by 300 Spartan heavy infantry under King Leonidas. For 2 days, the Greeks, utilizing their superior armor and the phalanx formation, held the line, repelling wave after wave of Persian attacks and inflicting catastrophic casualties. The story of their last stand is well known. A local traitor showed Xerxes a mountain path that allowed his elite immortals to outflank the Greek position. Seeing the inevitable, Leonidas dismissed the bulk of the allied forces to save them, choosing to fight to the death with his 300 Spartans and a few hundred others to cover the retreat. Their sacrifice, though a tactical defeat, became an unparalleled moral victory for the Greeks. It bought crucial time for the Athenian navy to prepare and for the city-states to unite. It also demonstrated that the Persian war machine was not invincible. The image of the indomitable Spartan fighting to the last man against impossible odds was seared into the Greek psyche, a powerful symbol of freedom that would resonate long after Xerxes had ordered Leonidas's body desecrated. The real turning point of the war, however, came not on land but at sea, in the narrow straits between the island of Salamis and the Athenian coast. After the Persians sacked and burned and evacuated Athens, the Greek fleet, led by the Athenian strategist Themistocles, appeared to be trapped. Themistocles, in a masterstroke of deception, sent a secret message to Xerxes, pretending to be a traitor and suggesting that the Greek alliance was fracturing. He urged the Persian king to attack immediately to prevent their escape. Xerxes, eager for a decisive victory, took the bait. He ordered his massive navy to enter the cramped waters of the Salamis Strait, where its numerical advantage became a crippling liability. The heavier, more maneuverable Greek triremes rammed and devastated the crowded Persian ships, which had no room to deploy their tactics effectively. From a golden throne set up on the shore, Xerxes watched in horror as his fleet was systematically destroyed. The defeat at Salamis was catastrophic. It threatened his line of retreat and supply back to Asia. Humiliated and his naval power broken, Xerxes made the fateful decision to withdraw with the bulk of his army back to Persia, leaving behind a force under his general Mardonius, which would be defeated the following year at the Battle of Plataea. Xerxes returned to his empire a changed man. The grand campaign that was meant to be his legacy had ended in costly failure. The remaining years of his reign were focused on completing the massive construction projects started by his father at Persepolis, but the fire of his earlier ambition seemed extinguished. The great mystery that shrouds the end of his life is not the failure of his foreign policy, but the intrigue within his own court. In 465 before the Common Era, after a reign of 20 years, Xerxes was assassinated in his palace. The culprit, according to later sources, was the commander of his royal bodyguard, a man named Artabanus. The motives remain murky, lost to the shadows of palace conspiracies. Was it a purely personal power grab by Artabanus, or was it a plot involving Xerxes' own son, Artaxerxes, who swiftly succeeded him to the throne? Some ancient accounts suggest Artabanus first murdered Xerxes' eldest son, Darius, and then framed another son for the crime, creating chaos that allowed him to strike at the king himself. Whatever the precise sequence, the assassination of the great king within the heart of his own palace signaled a profound weakness. The invincible aura of the Achaemenid monarchy had been pierced, first by the Greeks at Salamis and now by a dagger in the night. Xerxes' death did not cause the immediate collapse of the Persian Empire, which would endure for another century and a half, but it marked the beginning of a long, slow decline. The energy of expansion was gone, replaced by internal revolts, court intrigues, and a gradual ossification that would ultimately leave the empire vulnerable to a new force of conquest from the west, Alexander the Great. The reign of Xerxes stands as a monumental lesson in the limits of power, demonstrating that the most massive armies and the most brilliant engineering can still be undone by strategic miscalculation, the resilience of a free people, and the treachery that often festers in the halls of absolute power. While we have already explored the revolutionary, if brutal, unification of China under Qin Shi Huang, his most tangible and awe-inspiring legacy lies not in his standardized script or his legalist policies, but in the silent, underground army he commissioned to guard him for eternity. The discovery of the Terracotta Army in 1974 is arguably the greatest archaeological find of the 20th century, but it represents only a fraction of the secrets buried within the sprawling tomb complex. This vast mausoleum, described by the historian Sima Qian a century after the emperor's death, was designed as a microcosmic replica of his earthly empire, and the ongoing excavations continue to reveal its staggering complexity, piece by painstaking piece. The first pit, containing the now iconic ranks of thousands of life-sized soldiers, was merely the beginning. Subsequent excavations have uncovered a network of pits, each a separate department of the emperor's subterranean court. Pit 2 revealed a combined arms force of cavalry, chariots, and archers, arranged in precise military formation, showcasing the tactical diversity of the Qin army. But it is the other pits that truly expand our understanding of the emperor's vision for the afterlife. One chamber was found to contain a breathtaking tableau of court life, a troupe of terracotta acrobats and strongmen, caught in dynamic poses of lifting weights and performing feats of agility. These were not warriors, but entertainers meant to provide perpetual amusement for the emperor's spirit. Another pit held a serene assembly of bureaucrats and officials, each with their hands clasped respectfully, representing the sophisticated civil administration that ran the empire. The message is clear. Qin Shi Huang intended to rule in death exactly as he had in life, surrounded by every facet of his power structure, from the lowest infantryman to the highest civil servant. The technological sophistication buried with him is as impressive as the scale. Each of the approximately 8,000 soldiers discovered so far possesses a unique face, with a variety of hairstyles, facial expressions, and even ear shapes, suggesting they were modeled after real members of the imperial army. They were not sculpted as solid blocks of clay, but created using an early assembly line process. The bodies were mass-produced from a limited number of molds, but the heads, hands, and personalized details were added individually before firing in massive wood-fueled kilns. Originally, these figures were vividly painted in bright pigments of pink, red, green, blue, and purple, a polychrome spectacle that would have made the army appear terrifyingly lifelike in the flickering torchlight of the tomb. Perhaps the most astonishing non-human finds are the two sets of bronze chariots discovered in 1980. Half-life-sized and intricately detailed, they are masterpieces of bronze casting, complete with working parts, windows with grating, and ornate designs painted with vermilion and other colors. Drawn by teams of 4 bronze horses, these chariots were likely intended for the emperor's soul to travel through his underground kingdom, a testament to the unparalleled skill of Qin-era artisans. All of these discoveries, however, pale in comparison to the central, tantalizing mystery that has captivated the world for decades, the unexcavated main tomb mound itself. The ancient historian Sima Qian provided a chilling description of the interior, which modern science has yet to verify or disprove. He wrote that the burial chamber contains a miniature universe with a ceiling inlaid with pearls to represent the stars and constellations, and rivers of flowing mercury to mimic the Great Yellow and Yangtze rivers. This account has fueled both excitement and caution. Scientific surveys have indeed detected unusually high concentrations of mercury vapor in the soil around the tomb mound, lending a startling degree of credibility to Sima Qian's 2,000-year-old report. This presents an immense archaeological and ethical dilemma. The mercury alone poses a severe toxic hazard to excavators, but the potential rewards are beyond imagination. The same source also describes the tomb as being protected by an array of deadly crossbow booby traps, rigged to automatically fire at any intruder. The greatest fear for archaeologists, however, is not poison or projectiles, but the potential for irreversible destruction. The terracotta warriors lost their vibrant paint within minutes of exposure to the dry air of Xi'an, flaking off and turning to dust. The technologies to preserve such fragile organic paints and other materials, if they exist within the tomb, are still in their infancy. To open the tomb prematurely could be to destroy the very treasures we seek to understand. The Chinese government has therefore adopted a policy of patience, prioritizing preservation over exploration, choosing to wait until non-invasive technologies are advanced enough to map the interior fully and preservation techniques are guaranteed to succeed. So, for now, the heart of the first emperor's domain remains inviolate, a sealed capsule from the 3rd century before the Common Era, holding secrets about art, technology, and the mind of a man who shaped a nation, secrets that we can only dream of until the day we can confidently and safely step inside. But to truly understand the power Cleopatra wielded, we must look past the dramatic end of her life and examine the beginning, to the sophisticated and deliberate way she constructed her own identity. After the sensational narrative of her death, it is her life as a master of propaganda that reveals her true genius. Far from being merely a passive object of Roman fascination, Cleopatra VII was an active architect of her own image, a queen who understood that perception was a currency as vital as the gold in her treasury. Her most powerful tool in this endeavor was her deep and public identification with the Egyptian goddess Isis. This was not a casual religious devotion, it was a calculated political strategy of profound significance. In the Egyptian pantheon, Isis was the divine mother, the wife of Osiris and the protector of the kingdom. By presenting herself as the living embodiment of Isis, Cleopatra was making a powerful claim to her subjects. She was not a foreign Greek ruler imposing her will, but a pharaoh in the ancient tradition, a goddess queen whose right to rule was divinely ordained. This connection was made tangible in art and ceremony. she would have appeared in public dressed in the regalia of Isis, and temples erected during her reign reinforced this divine association, creating a visual and spiritual link between the queen and the goddess that resonated deeply with the Egyptian people. This carefully crafted image is captured for us not in grand statues, but in the most widespread and practical medium of the ancient world, coinage. The coins minted during Cleopatra's reign are perhaps the most honest portraits we have of her, commissioned by her own government and intended for circulation throughout her kingdom and beyond. And what they reveal is startling to anyone familiar with the sultry Hollywood depictions. These coins show a woman with a strong, prominent nose, a determined jaw, and deep-set eyes. Her face is not classically beautiful by modern or even ancient Greek standards. It is a face of intelligence, authority, and unmistakable power. On some coins, she is portrayed alongside Mark Antony, and the contrast is telling. His features are often softened, sometimes even rendered as less distinct than hers, while Cleopatra's profile is sharp and commanding. These coins were not meant to flatter in a conventional sense. They were meant to project stability, strength, and royal legitimacy. They tell us that Cleopatra wanted to be seen not as a beauty, but as a formidable sovereign. This challenges the Roman narrative that reduced her power to mere seduction, suggesting instead that her true influence lay in her political acumen and her ability to command respect on her own terms. This disparity between her self-portrayal and the later Roman caricature leads us to one of the great historical mysteries surrounding Cleopatra, the near-total loss of her own voice. We have no memoirs written by her, no first-hand accounts from her court historians, no personal letters that survive. The vast libraries of Alexandria, which might have held works sympathetic to her reign, were destroyed in the centuries after her death. The vivid accounts we rely on by Roman writers like Plutarch and Cassius Dio were written generations after she died based on sources that were overwhelmingly hostile. They were composed under the Roman Empire for a Roman audience, and their purpose was often to justify the actions of Augustus and vilify his enemies. Cleopatra in these texts becomes the exotic other, the dangerous Eastern queen who threatened Roman virtue. This creates a profound asymmetry in the historical record. We see her almost exclusively through the eyes of the men who conquered her, making it extraordinarily difficult to separate the real woman from the propaganda created to destroy her legacy. The mystery is not just what was lost, but why. The systematic erasure of her story was likely a deliberate part of Augustus's victory, an effort to ensure that no competing narrative could challenge his version of events. Yet, despite this centuries-long campaign of character assassination, glimpses of the real Cleopatra stubbornly persist. The very fact that she was the first Ptolemaic ruler to bother learning the Egyptian language speaks volumes about her political intelligence and her desire to connect with the people she ruled. Her diplomatic skill is evident in the alliances she forged, first with Julius Caesar and then with Mark Antony, partnerships that were as much about strategic statecraft as they were about personal relationships. She was a patron of the arts and sciences, continuing the Ptolemaic tradition of making Alexandria a center of learning. The portrait that emerges when we piece together these fragments is not of a simple temptress, but of a multilingual, intellectually curious, and ruthlessly pragmatic leader who fought for 2 decades to maintain her kingdom's independence against the relentless expansion of Rome. The mystery of the lost sources, therefore, becomes a silent testament to her significance. The effort required to obscure her story only underscores how threatening her power and her vision truly were to the world order that Rome sought to impose. The story of Ashoka the Great is one of history's most profound, but it is also a story of disappearance. For over 1700 years, this emperor of compassion, whose edicts were carved onto pillars and rocks across a subcontinent, vanished from the memory of the very land he had ruled. The man who had dedicated his life to spreading a message of righteousness was himself lost, His name faded into legend, then into silence, surviving only in a handful of Buddhist texts that were preserved not in India, but in Sri Lanka and other parts of Asia. In his homeland, the great monarch who had redefined power was simply gone. It was not until the 19th century, through the work of determined scholars and amateur linguists, that Ashoka was dramatically resurrected from the shadows, his voice rediscovered one carefully deciphered character at a time. The key to this great historical mystery lay scattered across the landscape, hidden in plain sight. For centuries, local populations in India had lived alongside large, polished stone pillars, marveling at their craftsmanship but having no idea who had erected them or why. Some pillars were crowned with magnificent animal sculptures, lions, elephants, bulls, that had become symbols of local folklore. Similarly, massive rock faces bore lengthy inscriptions in a strange, elegant script that no one could read. These monuments were noted by travelers, including Chinese pilgrims like Faxian and Xuanzang, who had come to India centuries after Ashoka's death seeking traces of the Buddha, but the connection to a specific king had been severed by time. The script itself was a puzzle. It was not the Devanagari used for Sanskrit, nor was it any known later alphabet. It was a dead language, a linguistic ghost waiting for its interpreter. The breakthrough began not with a single moment, but with a collective effort of intellectual archaeology. In the 1780s, a British antiquarian named James Prinsep arrived in India. As the assay master of the British East India Company Mint in Calcutta, he was an expert in metallurgy and coins, but his passion was epigraphy, the study of ancient inscriptions. He became the secretary of the Asiatic Society of Bengal and began to study the strange script found on these pillars and rocks. The inscriptions always seemed to begin with the same grouping of characters. Prinsep theorized that this recurring phrase might be an honorific title, perhaps something like King of Kings or His Majesty. He worked with a team of scholars and Indian pandits, comparing the unknown script to known ones like Sanskrit and Pali. The critical clue came from a set of inscriptions discovered in Gujarat, which included versions in the unknown script and in a later known Sanskrit script. This was the Rosetta Stone moment for Ashokan studies. Through meticulous comparison, Prinsep and his colleagues began to crack the code. The script, now known as Brahmi, was the mother of most scripts in the Indian subcontinent. And the recurring phrase at the beginning of the edicts, it was not a grand title but a name, Devanam Priya Priyadasi, which translates to beloved of the gods, he who looks upon with affection. But who was this benevolent ruler? The final, definitive link was made by connecting these inscriptions to the historical records preserved in Sri Lankan Buddhist chronicles like the Mahavamsa. These texts spoke of a great Indian emperor named Ashoka, who was referred to as Devanampiya Piyadasi. The circle was closed, the silent stones began to speak, and they announced the rediscovery of Ashoka the Great. The geographical spread of these edicts, once their author was known, revealed the breathtaking scale of his influence and his ambition to communicate. Major rock edicts were placed at the frontiers of his empire and in important population centers, from modern-day Afghanistan in the northwest to Karnataka in the south, and from Gurnar in the west to Kalinga in the east. These were not small, hidden messages. They were public announcements carved onto commanding rock faces, ensuring they would be seen by travelers, traders, and officials. The minor rock edicts and the beautifully polished pillar edicts, often located in the Ganges heartland, seem to have served a more specific administrative or commemorative purpose. This network of inscriptions paints a picture of an empire connected not just by roads and soldiers, but by a shared set of moral principles emanating from the center. It shows a ruler deeply concerned with reaching every corner of his domain, from the bustling cities to the remote provinces, with his message of Dhamma. The content of the edicts themselves provides a shockingly intimate portrait of a ruler's conscience. They are not bombastic accounts of military victories, though the Rock Edict Roman 13 does mention the conquest of Kalinga with profound remorse. Instead, they read like a ruler's personal diary made public. Ashoka speaks of his commitment to non-violence, his promotion of vegetarianism, his instructions for the humane treatment of animals, and his appointment of special officials, the Dhamma Mahamatas, to propagate ethical conduct among all his subjects. He expresses concern for the welfare of his people, advocating for obedience to parents, generosity to priests, and respect for all religious traditions. This was a revolutionary form of kingship where the emperor's power was demonstrated not through fear, but through a paternalistic concern for the moral and physical well-being of his entire population, human and animal alike. This brings us to the great, lingering mystery. Why did such a transformative and communicative leader vanish from the historical memory of India for so many centuries? The answer is likely a combination of factors. After the collapse of the Mauryan Empire, India fragmented into smaller kingdoms. The centralizing force of Ashoka's state, with its emphasis on his specific brand of Dhamma, may have dissolved. While his ideas influenced the development of Buddhism, which spread beyond India's borders, the political and social structures that supported his memory faded. Furthermore, later dynasties that rose to power, such as the Gupta Empire, which fostered a Hindu renaissance, may have had little interest in promoting the legacy of a Buddhist emperor. His pillars, while respected for their craftsmanship, were simply repurposed, or their inscriptions became illegible as the Brahmi script fell out of use. His story was a casualty of political change, shifting religious landscapes, and the simple, relentless passage of time. The rediscovery of Ashoka in the 19th century was more than an academic triumph. It was the recovery of a lost ideal, a voice from the past that suddenly spoke with startling relevance to a modern world still grappling with the same eternal questions of power, conscience, and how a society should choose to define itself. The assassination of Julius Caesar on the Ides of March was meant to be a surgical strike to save the Republic, a single act of violence to excise the tumor of a dictator. Instead, the daggers of the liberators did not heal Rome. They unleashed a hemorrhage that would bleed the old system dry. In the power vacuum that followed, the fragile alliance of Caesar's heirs and avengers quickly shattered, revealing that the true threat to the Republic was not one man's ambition, but a systemic disease that had been festering for a century. The final, fatal struggle for supremacy would not be between republicans and autocrats, but between two titans who both claimed Caesar's legacy: his cautious and cunning great-nephew Octavian, and his flamboyant and seasoned former lieutenant Mark Antony. Their clash was less a battle of ideologies than a personal war for the soul of the Roman world, a conflict that would be decided not in the Roman Forum, but on the waves off the coast of Greece. Octavian, just 18 years old at the time of Caesar's assassination, appeared to be the least likely candidate for ultimate power. He was sickly, inexperienced, and dismissed by Mark Antony as a boy who owes everything to a name. But beneath his unassuming exterior lay a political genius of the highest order. He understood the power of perception and legality. While Antony, as consul, tried to maneuver within the Senate, Octavian played a masterful populist card. He used his personal wealth and the immense popularity of the Caesar name to raise a private army from his great-uncle's veterans, positioning himself not as a rebel, but as the rightful avenger of the deified Julius. The formation of the Second Triumvirate with Antony and Lepidus was a temporary marriage of brutal convenience, a pact sealed with proscriptions that saw the deaths of hundreds of senators, including the great orator Cicero, whose head and hands were nailed to the rostra. This was not politics, it was butchery, and it made the ideals of the Republic a hollow joke. After eliminating Caesar's assassins at the Battle of Philippi, the triumvirs divided the Roman world, but the inherent tension between Octavian in the west and Antony in the east was unsustainable. The East became Antony's stage, and it was there that he crafted the narrative that Octavian would so skillfully use against him. Settling into the luxurious and sophisticated court of Alexandria, Antony's partnership with Cleopatra evolved from a strategic alliance into a profound personal and political union. In the eyes of the Roman people, however, this was his undoing. While Octavian toiled in Italy, managing veteran settlements and a war against Pompey's son, Antony was seen as succumbing to the decadent allure of a foreign queen. The event that turned opinion decisively against him was the so-called donations of Alexandria. In a grand public ceremony, Antony declared Caesarion, Cleopatra's son by Julius Caesar, to be the legitimate heir of Caesar, while distributing vast eastern territories to his own children with Cleopatra. To Octavian, this was a gift. He unleashed a torrent of propaganda, portraying Antony as a traitor who had abandoned his Roman wife, Octavian's sister Octavia, and fallen under the spell of a sorceress queen intent on making Rome a mere satellite of Egypt. The war, when it came, was framed not as a civil conflict between Romans, but as a patriotic crusade to save Rome from Eastern despotism. The final confrontation came at Actium on the Ionian Sea in September of 31 before the Common Era. Antony and Cleopatra's fleet, though sizable, was plagued by disease, desertion, and a lack of experienced oarsmen. Octavian's fleet, commanded by the brilliant Admiral Agrippa, was smaller but superbly trained and equipped with lighter, more maneuverable ships. The battle itself was less a glorious clash than a slow, grinding strangulation. Agrippa avoided a direct melee, using his superior mobility to pick at Antony's heavier, lumbering vessels. The pivotal moment came when Cleopatra, stationed in the rear with a squadron of 60 ships, suddenly ordered her sails hoisted and broke through the center of the conflict, heading for the open sea. Antony, seeing her flee, abandoned his own flagship and followed. The rest of their fleet, leaderless, fought on for hours before surrendering. The escape of the two leaders has been debated for centuries. Was it a premeditated plan that went awry, a cowardly flight, or a desperate attempt to salvage their cause by escaping to Egypt to fight another day? Regardless of the motive, the result was the same. Actium was a decisive victory for Octavian. The myth of Antony's power was broken. This leaves us with one of history's most compelling what-if scenarios. What if Julius Caesar had lived? He was planning a massive campaign against the Parthian Empire, a war that would have taken him away from Rome for years. Would his absence have allowed the Republican factions to regroup and restore the old system's balance? Or was the Republic already a corpse, merely waiting for a strongman to claim it? Caesar's own actions suggest the latter. He had already accumulated powers that made a mockery of the Constitution. The Republic's fundamental problem, the inability to manage its vast wealth, its professional armies whose loyalty was to their generals, and the immense social inequality remained unsolved. Caesar's assassination did not address these root causes. It merely removed the man who had temporarily papered over the cracks. His death proved that the system was beyond repair. The only question left was not if the Republic would fall, but who would be left standing to pick up the pieces. The victory at Actium gave the final, unambiguous answer. Octavian, soon to be Augustus, had eliminated all rivals. The age of the Roman Republic was over. In its place rose the Roman Empire, a system of one-man rule that would endure for centuries, built upon the grave of a liberty that the assassins of the Ides of March had, in their tragic miscalculation, helped to bury forever. And so our journey through the corridors of ancient power comes to a close. We have stood in the presence of pharaohs and philosophers, walked with conquerors and lawmakers, and witnessed the fiery resolve of rebels. From the revolutionary tolerance of Cyrus the Great to the calculated political theater of Augustus, from the spiritual transformation of Ashoka to the relentless ambition of Qin Shi Huang, these 30 leaders represent an astonishing spectrum of human endeavor. Their stories remind us that the drive to shape the world is a force that wears many faces: the visionary, the tyrant, the reformer, and the tragic hero. What common thread binds a figure like Hammurabi, who sought to codify justice in stone, to one like Boudica, who unleashed a firestorm of vengeance? It is the profound and often perilous relationship with power itself. Each of these individuals grappled with its immense potential and its heavy cost. For some, power was a tool to raise magnificent cities, to forge legal systems, to connect cultures through trade and ideas. For others, it was a weapon to conquer, to control, and to crush opposition. Yet, in every case, their actions were driven by a belief that they could impose their will upon the chaotic currents of history, leaving a mark that would endure long after they were gone. This universal hunger for legacy, to be remembered, is the silent engine that connects their disparate eras and empires. But beyond the grand narratives of empire and conquest, the most enduring legacy of these ancient titans is the world they inadvertently built for us. The political structures, the legal principles, the cultural exchanges, and even the philosophical questions they grappled with form the foundational layers of our modern existence. The concept of a centralized state, the idea of universal human rights, the very languages we speak and the religions we follow, all bear the fingerprints of their distant decisions. Their triumphs gifted us with stability and innovation, while their failures and brutalities serve as timeless cautionary tales about the corrupting nature of absolute authority. We are, in a very real sense, living in the world they made, a complex inheritance of both brilliance and trauma. History is not a closed book but an ongoing conversation, and these leaders are some of its most compelling voices. Their lives continue to challenge and fascinate us because they embody the extremes of human potential, so we turn the question over to you. Which of these stories resonated most deeply? Was it the cunning strategy of Hannibal, the mysterious transformation of Chandragupta Maurya, or the defiant tragedy of Cleopatra? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We love to hear which figures from the past capture your imagination. If you enjoyed this voyage through time, be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell, because our exploration of the mysteries that shaped